so we don't have any public testimony at our meeting. Oh, did I get ahead of IT and starting the Zoom? Okay, stay tuned. Are we all set now? Okay, welcome everyone to the Tuesday, October 13th, 2020 Washington County Board of Commissioners meeting. This is a work session, so we don't have public testimony on work or in work sessions. The first item on our, I will note for the recording that all 5 members of the commission are here this morning. First item on the agenda is board and leadership communication. Colleagues, who would like to go first? Anything to report?
I'll go first because I don't really have very much to report. Thank you, Clean Water Services, for your hospitality and kindnesses and little extra touches to make us feel like we had a little bit of New Orleans as well, and some really good programming, some great discussions, and it's been a pleasure to be on this board of Washington County Board of Commissioners as well as Clean Water Services. It's been such a privilege to be here for this length of time, and so thanks for the great sessions last week. That's it.
Anyone else?
No, I just echo those comments that you guys did a really good job.
I think today we have to turn the mic on.
Turn it on.
Go. Yep.
Always something different. Okay.
Always something, right?
That's right. You know, I'd echo Dick's comments. You did a really nice job, Diane, and your staff. And we're dealing, as many of you know, some interesting OSTAR conversations. And you sent me a copy of the audit report for quick this morning, which I started to look at. And we've got some things going there. We had WCCC yesterday. Not a lot to report. One more report on the Burnside Bridge, which I guess we're going to do that Thursday again at JPAC, but nothing really to report there. Jurisdictional transfers, though, keep your eyes on that one, everybody, because it's a big issue. Everybody wants to transfer, assets, and it's very expensive, particularly for Jerry, you, and Dick in regard to TV highway. That's just really an expensive, difficult highway. And they would like us to transfer that. They also want us to transfer 99W, meaning that somehow we would take her to the city of Tigard, and of course they're not keen on that. That's a state facility. But anyway, keep your eyes peeled on that one. That's it.
Anything else?
Yeah, just I've been continuing to meet with state individuals on this broadband. Remember, rural broadband is kind of top of mind in a number of venues right now. So I met with a couple of state folks from the Broadband Advisory Council last week. There is some money available, possibly from, I hope I get this right, it's either House Bill 2173 or Senate Bill 160, 1603, something. I can't even read my own writing. Anyway, there's a couple of bills out there that the state is going to try and allocate some money to, and we might be able to apply for the first phase of our study on our rural broadband issues here in Western Washington County. And of course, that'll include Tillamook, Columbia, and Clatsop. But anyway, I will continue to keep you updated on that as I have another meeting this week on it, and then we'll be moving ahead on some other things. So I'll keep you all up to speed on what's going on there.
Is legislatively, a lot of the rural legislators didn't support some of the broadband funding, but our Washington County delegation did.
Yeah.
Including the ones that are out in the western part of Washington County. So that should be worth something, I think.
Yeah, well, it's an interesting concept because, we start focusing on what basically are 3 or 4 counties here and how much we need this rural broadband. But this is a statewide issue. And so the money gets spread a little bit like peanut butter.
Oh, yeah.
It's very difficult to come up with the right amount of money and to do that. But yeah, it's interesting that some of the southern and eastern folks weren't as supportive of this. So anyway, we'll stay tuned.
Can you explain that to me, at some, not now, but some point? I don't know how that all gets paid for, and that's what you're talking about. And
Well, they started with the cell phone tax, but I don't think that got passed, and then not in the
who
regular
provides the
session.
service, though?
Who provides the service? Well, that's what we'd have to work with the private sector.
Okay, so it's not us doing it.
No, we're trying to get the let's just say the mainstream is the high-speed internet that's spread all over, but not utilized. And so we're trying to get the private sector then will be the last mile. And so we're going to get the main line, and we hope then we can work a deal to get them to tap into that and provide services to the last mile. Because otherwise it's too expensive, the consumer can't afford it, and the private sector is not going to do it and lose money, so.
So
That's
it's making sure that the trunk lines go in through the rural area and then get the local connectivity from that trunk line to the different homes and cluster areas.
Yeah, and it's not like,
Our only involvement is to facilitate then. We don't have a financial stake. Or,
not at this point in time. We might in some of the study stuff, but again, we're going to be asking for some grant money from a variety of sources, and so, yeah.
And there have been resources from the congressional bills over the years to help get some of this infrastructure in. Yeah, and Clackamas County's been very active in this area.
Yeah, Tillamook County's already done their study. Yeah, they're well ahead of us.
Yeah. So it is through AOC Day yesterday. It is part of the legislative roster and the 16 priorities. Rural broadband is
Great,
in there.
all right, thank you.
Yeah.
Good morning. Few things. I did attend the AOC, at least until my internet bumped me off, but I was at the AOC meeting. I know Chair.
board meeting?
The board meeting. Chair was there as well. I was not able to attend the membership meeting, the earlier meeting, but.
The legislative committee meeting.
Yeah, sorry. Thank you. Tonight is a Public Health Advisory Committee meeting, and also I'll be attending the CPO 1 meeting and talking about the 2 charter amendments. So I'll be with that group this evening. Thursday night is Centro Cultural board meeting, and then Friday will be the housing forum, and I'll be attending that. I also want to say thank you to Clean Water Services for last week and all the work and the effort that all of you put into a really great substitute. So thank you.
So on the CPO meeting, there's a couple resources to make sure people are aware of. There's the website right on the Washington County page, and there's a great button right on the home page. And then the voters pamphlet pages
Right.
as well.
Right.
So, great. So from me, yesterday we had the AOC Legislative Committee meeting where we had a lot of discussion about the overall legislative agenda. There are 16 key items there. Each of the major steering committees recommended top 3 or 4 high-priority items. So we adopted that slate, and that really sets the stage for how the steering committees go through the 4,000-plus bills that may be under consideration. The slate had a couple of tweaks to it, numbering, and in one case, a correction. So rather than forward to you the incoming document, I'm waiting for them to update the outgoing document. And I assume you're all on the mail list already, but just in case, I'll make sure you get that. In the AOC board meeting, we have a recommendation, or we adopted a recommendation to update the bylaws to allow for a special report. So what has occurred in a few sessions is that there have been some controversial items where the legislative committee was not able to come up with a 67% in support of an item. So there's a provision for a majority report, a provision for a minority report, which is 25%. But there are some big topic areas where there are perspectives that we want to make sure the legislators are aware of, but we're a bit split. So we're recommending that at the AOC membership meeting, at the annual meeting in November, that a provision, a change to the bylaws be adopted to allow for a special report to explain the different viewpoints. So you'll see that at the conference. The annual conference schedule is now available, so I wanted to make sure I brought that to your attention. Then the other item I wanted to make sure you're aware of, the Special Districts Association of Oregon has an opening on their board of directors for the sanitary seat. I forwarded this to all of us as well as to Diane and Mark. The application is due by October 20th, so next Tuesday. So I wanted to bring this to your attention in case, as the Board of Directors for Clean Water Services, we might want to participate. Clean Water Services is of such a size that we have a great team who works on our legislative needs, so it's not something that's necessary, but I wanted to make sure you were aware of it nonetheless. Let's see, the last thing, we don't have a COVID update today. So let me just mention, at the Tri-County Chair meeting on Wednesday, September 30th, I've had to type that in email so many times the last few days, we met with the our public health experts again. This was a follow-on to waiting to see how the Labor Day holiday potential bump went with the COVID numbers. So you all get the OHA emails just like I do, and sort of depressing to see how the numbers have gone up and up. And statewide, we set a new high for cases up in the 400 range about 4 or 5 days ago. Luckily, that number came down into the 200 range yesterday. But nonetheless, the numbers are still pretty high. What we were really trying to focus on is, gosh, can we ever get to phase 2 opening, meeting the criteria, and as well as checking in to see how we're doing as a community with meeting the school metrics as set by the state. So as you know, we had also, Tri-Chairs had signed on to a letter composed primarily from our public health team asking the state to consider various changes that would be more reflective of our regional community. We did get a response to that letter late last week. I forwarded that to all of you. Wasn't the most helpful of responses. It is what it is what it boils down to. So where we're at is our public health experts are thinking that, it might be useful for our region to have a modified phase 1, something more than what we currently have with phase 1, but if the state continues to hold on phase 2, then we're not quite, the community performance isn't quite there, according to the state. So the team is working on that. So we have a meeting coming up with them next Friday, October 16th. So essentially, beyond the numbers we get every single day, and our team's working really hard to support our community members, our long-term care facilities, our businesses, all of that. All those efforts continue. But we're not at a point of having any additional recommendations and so forth to consider.
Was there, excuse me, was there a, kind of a, can you describe what the adaptation might be if there was a 1.5? I think that's what I've heard it.
No, that's what the meeting next Friday may
Okay, so there
possibly
wasn't
hold.
any,
No.
you know, because we're hearing so much about bowling alleys and different types of organizations, I just wondered if that was part of
Yep,
it.
yep.
So, and it's in the news, you know.
Yep.
Tired bowling alley.
So, nothing yet.
Okay.
And we do, today's the 13th, so there's the meeting on Friday, and we teed that up, or asked them to shoot for that date so that we could have discussions as boards the following week. So it's stay tuned. We may know more, or I might hear more late Friday or into Monday.
Thank you.
Yep. So, and I have seen newspaper articles about how OSHA has followed up with several businesses in our area, so you may hear from that. Onward ho we go on this new normal journey with COVID. So, anything else? No? Leadership communication, good morning.
Good morning, Chair and Board. So I have one item to bring forward to you. This is regarding the supportive housing services. I will flag that staff are prepared to provide a full overview for you at the November 3rd work session. Today, what I wanted to bring forward is a request for a board member to serve as an ex officio to the SHS Oversight Committee. They are expecting to begin their work on October 19th and conclude by the end of October. So this is going to be a heavy lift during this point in time. There is an ex officio that will be serving, that is requested to serve from each of the tri-counties on this committee. So today, seeing if there's interest from a board member for this role.
This is something that I'm interested in doing, and if my conversations with the chair of Multnomah County hold true, it's something that could be a little political, and she may be pursuing it as well. So, but it's a board decision. So.
Sound like you're volunteering.
Yeah.
Yes, I am, but I'm not volunteering in a way to push anybody else's interest out. That's, I'm pretty democratic about this stuff. So I'm happy to do it. I'm interested in doing it, but wanted to keep the floor open in case anybody else.
Go for it.
Okay,
Okay.
all right.
Thank you for that, Chair Harrington. Also working with the staff team, while the first update will be coming to you on November 3rd, we are fully expecting to also give you written updates along the way on SHS, because we know this is an important strategic priority for the board.
Speaking of which, I know I have a rolling agenda for next week, but I think I might have a few particular items under board communication. So I think we'd do pretty well in the half-an-hour time slot, but if it's a tight agenda, I just want to give a heads up. We may need to allow a little bit more time for board communications on November. Oh, no, next week. Sorry, I'm a week ahead of myself.
We'll make that time allotment, and I've been watching the time, and it does tend to be about a 45-minute update for communication, so I'm going to make that change on the agenda, just so we're planning our time appropriately.
Well, I think next Tuesday, there are a couple items I've got in mind, so, okay, thank you. So you're all set? Brad, thank you for being here for county council while Alan's on vacation. He's
Yes.
having a wet one.
Well, he's way out east, so who knows what's going on with him. He's on his annual hunting trip. He'll be back Wednesday, the 21st, so I'll be here this week and next. And if you have any questions, just give me a call.
Great. Diane,
Great,
thank you again for a wonderful WEFTech. Commissioner Scouten mentioned this earlier, but for those of you who may not be familiar, I know it was my first virtual conference, and ordinarily we would have been attending in New Orleans. So the team made it very comfortable and fun, and that includes the WEFTech team. And we had some great time with our Clean Water Services staff to expand our own familiarity with different topics as well. So job well done.
Thank you, Board. The staff at Clean Water Services was really excited about the level of engagement of the board and the questions that you asked. Although they were attending virtually because we needed to social distance in the room, they all commented how fortunate we are to have the board that we do. The association folks in the utility world, they all commented, and they've been utilizing Clean Water Services Board as an example of why Clean Water Services is able to achieve what it can achieve, and it's really because of the board and the board's engagement. So they all want to thank you, and we learned some new things that we can maybe turn our sewage sludge into packing peanuts, which was rather interesting, and what the promise of algae could potentially have for biomedical uses. That was really fascinating. And Cindy Wallace-Lage from Black & Veatch really thanked this board. She can see why we're involved with the circular economy and resource recovery. So thank you very much. And I think they're going to utilize you as an example, as a challenge for other boards of utilities to be that engaged. One of the things we talked about with the team is the engagement with the board. So we start with WEFTech, and then we have the budget. So we're looking at how to engage the board in another learning session with our performance excellence as we unroll the roadmaps and have the teams come in. Board Director Pam Tree said it's really great to have the team members come and present their items. They're all very excited, and we'll continue to do that. And so thank you very much.
All right, unless anyone has anything else, we'll move on to our next topic, the Homeless Plan Advisory Committee appointments. I'll welcome staff up to our presentation table. Good to see you both.
Good morning. Good morning, Chair Harrington and Commissioners. In 2009, the Homeless Plan Advisory Committee bylaws identified 17 positions to create a diverse, high-level leadership committee with expertise and authority to provide oversight and funding prioritization to the implementation of the county's homeless plan, A Road Home. Diversity, equity, and inclusion are at the forefront of the interview process for filling committee vacancies. The current committee represents 18% communities of color, while we have been as high as 29%, but we know that we have areas of improvement. With 6 positions that will expire in December, providing an opportunity to increase our racial diversity. Interviews occurred with the applicants that have been applications that have been received, and a recommendation today is before you for appointment to fill 2 vacant positions that each have 1 applicant each, and to seek to as they seek to support the work of the Homeless Plan Advisory Committee. The 2 positions include hospital healthcare representative and philanthropic. Under the hospital healthcare representative, Dr. Elizabeth Uno, a family medicine and obstetric physician employed by Virginia Garcia Memorial Health Clinic and affiliated with the Hillsborough Medical Center, OHSU. Dr. Uno shared with me her passion to address health disparities that begin with safe, stable housing. As a person of color, she recognizes the need for culturally specific services and the need for better alignment across systems to truly address housing, healthcare, and food insecurities. The second position is for philanthropic. Casey Waidoha, Director of Communication for Virginia Garcia Memorial Health Foundation. Casey works with public and private partners to create capacity to deliver healthcare and culturally specific services in our community. She has a passion to address the systemic barriers that vulnerable persons experience, many of whom are communities of color seeking health care at Virginia Garcia Memorial Health Clinic. She shared with me that her clients speak 62 different languages. After reviewing both applications, I would like to put forth their recommendation for appointment to the Homeless Plan Advisory Committee to help us further our work in addressing the socioeconomic challenges that our vulnerable populations experience. Thank you for your considerations.
So before we finish this topic, I would like to recognize Commissioner Scouten. He was one of the original members of the Housing Plan Advisory Committee since 2008. Thank you for your leadership, calm, thoughtful leadership.
It's really been my pleasure working with,
We'll miss you.
yeah, and the rest of the group.
Thank you so much, yes.
Yeah.
Are there any questions from commissioners?
I have a question and then my
Yep.
full disclosure. So these two individuals are going to take the midterm vacancies, and that's why their terms are that, and then do they have to come back through us again to be renewed for the next 3-year terms, or?
Correct. That is how the bylaws read. So we will retain their application on file and then consider any other additional applicants that we receive for those positions.
But that'll come back to us again for approval in
Correct.
December,
Yes.
so it's going to be a short term. Well, and full disclosure for the rest of the commission, Casey Wydola is my daughter, and she lives in Sherwood, and she has been actively working with Virginia Garcia for a few years, and I really appreciate the fact you're going to recommend her appointment.
Thank you. She was very compelling in her interview, so thank you for raising such a wonderful daughter.
It wasn't him, it was his wife.
In spite of.
Anybody else have any questions? Well, I have a question. So when you go through that application period for the remaining appointments, there's a comment too. I would like to have some information about these 2, 4, 6 folks whose terms end later this year. Have they been showing up to the meetings? Have they been engaged? Have they offered insight that has been useful to the committee, things like that? Because this is an area where we've heard a lot from our community members about wanting to see additional services, people being concerned about it. So we may have more applicants, and so I want to make sure that, I mean, for lack of a better way to put it, that we have more than just someone occupying a chair or a position. That's all.
Thank you, Chair Harrington. And we, of the 6, 2 have already expressed that they will not be renewing or submitting a renewal application. So there will be some
Okay.
vacancies that we need to fill.
And then the comment is, I remember there is a member from the Washington County Civic Leaders Program that is a doctor from another country who's not credentialed here in the U.S. That may be interested as well, but I'll have to work on her name in my head. I can see her face, but I can't seem to find the name at the moment, so.
Thank you.
I'll follow up with Amanda. She could probably help me with it. So, thank you.
Thank you.
Well, I don't know who's going to be filling my slot, but I can tell you this has been a very hugely positive experience for me, and we've come such a long ways, starting with our early days, that we made that key decision that we needed to be focused on housing first, and we've put additional resources, and a lot of us have put a lot of our heart and soul into this, and the 2 of you in particular. So it'll be a great assignment for someone on the board.
Yep. I'm going to be bringing information forward to our roundtables, but we will have a new member on the commission in January. So I would recommend that when we have a roundtable in very early January, that we review all of our committee assignments. And welcome our new board member. Great. Well,
Thank you so much.
looks like we're going to be all set.
Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we're going to move on to some deep numbers. Hope everyone's brain is going. It's after 9 o'clock now. Mine's getting going here. So fiscal year 2020, 2021, so that's our current fiscal year. Financial update with our CFO, Jack Leong.
Good morning, Chair Hanton. Good morning, Commissioners. I'm in front of you to bring this fiscal year's first financial update. And included with this financial update, we are actually going to also do a summary of the state revenue forecast, which recently came out toward the end of September. Next slide, please. So we have a five-part agenda today. We will first look at the summary of the state revenue forecast, and then we'll move on to look at the county's fiscal year 2021 financial performance. So far, those are the actuals looking against budget. And then for the third part, we'll look at the general fund, the 5-year forecast. There has been some updates to our assumptions based on the current event. And then we are going to look at the watch list for the financial outlooks of what to look out for in the future. And last but not least, we will do another review of the fiscal year 2021 and fiscal year 21-22 budget timeline. For the 2021, it's related with budget adjustment timelines. So with that, we'll get started. Next slide, please. So for the state economic and the revenue forecast, there is a general theme. If you have read the report, the four topics over here I have summarized are the most memorable points I have pulled out of the report. The number one is that the recession is still real, but the impact is not as severe as previously forecasted. We'll walk through some of that in the later slides. The second one is the unemployment rate remains very high and disproportionate across income levels. What that means is the lower income level folks are impacted more in this pandemic. And then the third one is the 2020 personal income tax collection is remaining in a moderate growth pattern for now. Their tone is still fairly conservative, but really the result for 2020 so far that they're seeing is that it's still going to grow moderately. And then last but not least, state revenues are expected to experience slower growth in the next 4 years compared to previous forecast. But the key word in here that I'm reading is that they're still experiencing growth in the next 4 years. So next slide, please. So I put out some, yes.
Could you go back to that previous slide? The first bullet, the recession is still real, but the impact is not as severe as previously forecasted. You know, I've been involved in hearing a lot from the state as well, and I guess I would say that the initial impact is not as severe. Not just, I think that in your fourth bullet, you say that slower growth, but I remain concerned that we're lagging behind what their true impact is right now. So.
You're absolutely right. And their data is absolutely based on forecast and into the future. I think just to clarify what the first bullet is speaking is in June, they did a forecast based on the pandemic and the economic situation at the time. And things look a lot worse, or their forecast was a lot worse back then. So in this iteration of the forecast, they have brought that forecast up a little bit. We're still going through a recession. There's no question about that. It's just in their most current forecast, it's not as severe as the last one that they did. So both are based on assumptions. Yes. Thank you, Commissioner Trees. Next slide, please. So I have collected some more representative chart in the state revenue forecast and economic forecast to demonstrate what are some of the key points that I'm getting out of the revenue forecast. So the left and right, actually, the left chart represents the employment rate, and as you can see, unemployment rate, actually, as you can see that the 2020 number is significantly higher than the 2019 number. We're actually back to 2010, close to 2010 level if we draw a straight line across. And then on the right-hand side is the personal income tax collections. And you can see that we're still on a step ladder going up that supports their claim about continued growth, but slower growth. And what that slow means is, if you see the red line, which I drew on top of their chart, is the trend line for the last 3 years. And you can see that the slope has significantly lowered in the next 2 years between the 2019 and the 2020, and that actually gets us on a fairly even average growth rate back from 2010. So we're essentially back into the slower growth mode again. And we're going to go into a little more further details in the later slides. Next slide, please. This one is worth looking at. This layoff is still mostly temporary, and that's one of the main themes in the state economic forecast. As we can see, the severe drop of employment numbers. The light blue line represents the permanent layoffs. The darker blue line represents the temporary layoffs, and the red line represents the totals. So we can see that the permanent layoffs is real. However, comparatively, it doesn't compare to the number of the temporary layoffs. Next slide, please. And then looking at the income level, this is where they were talking about the disproportionate of impact on the income level. We can see the lighter blue line, which is a higher income level above 62,000, and that has a moderate impact dip into the 5% range, and then kind of stayed there. And then the middle level, which is between 40 to 62K, that's the lighter gray line, a little more severe than the blue line, but not too far from it. And the red line, which is the lower income level under 40K, that's the really severe impact is, and that dipped all the way down to the 25, 26, 27% range, and then slowly grew back up to the 15% range, but still much more severe than the higher income level. Next slide, please.
Can I ask you a question?
Yes, absolutely.
Word
Tertial?
terciles? What is that?
I'm sorry, can you?
Back in that last slide. What is that? Something based?
Oh, the,
Tertiary.
Tertiary. I mean, what is that? Is that what does that word mean?
oh, that's a good question. I'll have to research that and get back to you. I actually missed researching that word. So. I'll follow up. Tertial based on industrial average. Yeah, that's you.
I don't know. I haven't seen it.
We can always count on Commissioner Rogers for really good questions, and this one definitely is one that I need to research and get back to you after this session.
Yeah, it means breaking data up into 3 groups. So it's a tercile. So that's why you got high, medium, and low. Just looked it up. It's kind of interesting.
So I wasn't the only
you,
one
Dan.
who didn't really know.
No, yeah.
Yeah, but
Thank you, guys.
ask the question about the item on the next slide.
Oh, okay.
So the next slide is a comparison between the last couple of recessions and the recovery period. How many, in terms of how many years it take our employment rate to recover back to the zero-based level. And we can see that we have some shorter examples of the 1973 recession, the 1990 recession, which really took about a year, a little over a year, less than 2 years to recover. And then the rather lengthy ones, the 2007, the Great Recession, and the 1980 recession, which took about 7 years to recover. And the current state economic forecast is, the September one, is expecting for us to recover in that 3 to 4 year range, which is the red, the thicker red line with a thicker dotted line into the future. And back in their June forecast, this is where they expected a longer recovery and heavier hit back in June. That's a thinner dotted red line that gets us out to the 4 year range. So all in all, what has changed between June till now is that they are a little more optimistic of how quickly we can recover from this economic condition.
Do you have
We're a little less pessimistic, is more like
A little less
you
optimistic.
don't have anything by county, do you? Because if you looked in some areas, there are industries that are closing that aren't going to come back just because of the way they're structured. But this is statewide, right?
Correct. This is statewide, and we do get our county-specific information from the Oregon Employment Department on a monthly basis. So I when I was preparing this presentation, I haven't received the latest update yet, but I can definitely follow up on the our county-specific information.
WSI, I know they use the same sort of things, but they drill down into the region, and so it'd be interesting to know the region, because that's a little not that we don't care about the whole state. I mean, still,
Yep.
yeah.
So why Sasquatch? Does anybody know?
That, I asked Josh Lehner that same question, and it started like, I think, 5 to 6 years ago, and they just liked it.
Oh, okay.
Is that true?
There's no particular message here,
Wow.
just poking a little fun.
Yep.
Okay.
All right, next slide, please. So this slide is also very representative. If you look at the total, the thicker, darker blue line, the total personal income has grown since April, looking at that. But what they're saying is that is heavily driven by the federal financial aid, specifically the transfer payments, the direct payments to taxpayers from the IRS, as well as the unemployment income that has been really fueling the personal income. If we take those two parts away, which they call the transfer payments, we can actually see that there's a between 5 to 10% dip in the personal income with a slow growing back into the later months. So next slide, please. When it comes to employment, this is where they are actually drawing their baseline scenario, which is the thicker, darker blue line, to say that we're anticipated to recover by 2023 back to the zero level that's pre-pandemic. But also they have a faster recovery scenario and a double dip scenario. The faster recovery scenario is supported in their forecast by a earlier or faster availability of vaccine for the coronavirus. And then the double dip scenario is based on criteria that if we get a second wave of the virus into this winter or even into the spring, that would drive both of those scenarios. And we can see they also brought in that dotted line, their dashed line, there for the Great Recession equivalent. It took about 7 years to recover the employment rate back to the normal level or pre-event level. So those are their scenarios. Next slide, please. And then we have the Oregon personal income tax liability. Now we're getting into the revenue area about the state's revenue outlook. We can see that those three lines, while that they remain fairly close to each other on this chart, but we can see that the unit on the left-hand side are in billions. So there's actually a lot of money at stake when it comes to their revenue. The red line is their March 20 forecast, and that is based on pre-pandemic situations. And then in June, which is a gray dashed line, as you can see that it dropped quite a bit. And then their September 20 forecast kind of brought us back in between those two scenarios. So that's basically the theme that they're painting. It's less pessimistic about how bad the revenue situation is going to be. Next slide, please.
You have that for the corporate side? That's only the personal side, right?
Yes, they actually have some information on the corporate side. However, when it comes to the Oregon, the personal income tax is a much larger portion compared to the corporate exercise tax. So that's why they highlight that more than the corporate side. They actually do have a chart that breaks those information into their separate categories, and I can forward that after the session.
Step one's a driver of the other. If there's no corporate jobs, there's no personal
Absolutely.
income tax.
Yeah,
So
and
I
they
don't know
do.
what the nexus is there, yeah.
Absolutely, they do follow the same trend when you look at the numbers. So the personal income tax trend is very similar to the corporate. The reason that they highlighted as part of their revenue forecast is just because of the sheer size of the personal income tax being part of the state's revenue. Next is the quarterly video lottery sales. We were fairly concerned about the video lottery revenue coming into our county at the state level. Obviously, they were concerned about that too. You can see that before pandemic, that lighter blue line follows a fairly stable growth pattern that goes into the future. And then in June, which is the darker blue line, that they anticipated dip and quite a bit of slower growth back compared to their September forecast, which is a red line with a dotted into the future. So that's also part of our county's concern because video lottery revenue has been part of a smaller but important part of our general fund spending, and we're definitely glad to see this chart that actually changes our assumption on our video lottery revenues a little bit.
I have a question about this one. Do you know if it the video lottery sales are seasonal, aren't they, in relationship to how many people can be in the establishment where the video machine is right now?
Correct.
So is that built into this projection?
That is built into this projection. As you can see, that sharp dip right there is actually representing the shutdown of all of these establishments, and then the revenue really go down to near zero. And then the coming back up is what they're anticipated reopening, and so folks are able to continue to do business in that area.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Next slide, please. So this really sums it up. It's their total revenue forecast and the state net general fund revenue. As we can see, that pre-pandemic, the red line, which is the March 20 forecast, fairly straight, fairly strong growth pattern. And then in June, the dotted lighter blue line brought it really down from, if you look at the 2023 level, from close to 25 million down to close to 20 million. So almost a 5 billion, or almost a $45 billion change there. And then their September forecast, which is a darker blue line, is landing us somewhere in the middle with a little bit a quicker growth trajectory compared to the June forecast. So it's, I don't know if it's right to frame it as a good news, but it's definitely not as bad of a news back in June compared to the state revenue. So, and next slide, please. Any questions for this section of the state economic forecast or revenue forecast?
I have one. Are there any assumptions about further stimulus legislation or funding, Part 2s on the federal level, or they assume there will be no additional federal dollars?
So within their forecast, they didn't speak to that specifically. So what that means to me is that they are not building in any projections for any legislation that hasn't been put in place yet.
Okay.
Any other questions before we move on to the next part? All right, next slide, please. So the next part will review the county's fiscal year 2021 financial performance, and we are still fairly early into the fiscal year. I just wanted to put that disclaimer out there. It's not quite representative of the entire year yet, but that gave us some early indicators, which I'll point out in the later slides. Next slide, please. So as a summary level, let's look at the county-wide and the general fund first. And what we have been doing is to compare the current year against the last 2 years of year-to-date. It's basically by September, how much revenue we have earned in the last 2 years, how much expenditure we have experienced in the last 2 years compared to the current year condition. On the county-wide area, you can see that I have highlighted the revenue percentage as an area to look into compared to the last 2 years where we have earned 11%, 8.9% by September, and then this year we're coming up to 6%. Now, before you get real concerned, I did look into the reasons of what drives that. There are 2 reasons, and neither needs to be very concerned. There is one is a timing difference between when do we book a fairly sizable prior year grant revenue carry forward. What that means is that there have been some grant revenue that we weren't able to utilize, and we carry that forward into the new year as a revenue. And that is over $30 million in HHS. So that's just a timing difference there. The other one is also a slight timing difference is because by the time where I run this report, September is not all finished yet. It takes actually to the middle of the next month to finish up the prior months in our accounting system. So that's a timing difference there as well. That's not to say that there aren't isolated areas in the special fund where we should be a little concerned, and we can go into that a little bit later. Looking at the expenditure, we're tracking right along on our spend rate compared to the last 2 years, so no concerns there. On the general fund side, we're actually staying fairly stable. Compared to the last year, we're earning 5.58% of our revenue. And then on the spending side, we're actually spending a little bit slower than last year at 16.63%. So no concerns there on general fund at this moment. Next slide, please. Looking at the general government side, it's a special fund that's remaining on the general government side. It's the fleet services and the central services. Both are internal service funds. On the fleet side, we can see that we are experiencing a slightly dip in the revenue percentage, but not to the point where we need to be concerned about. And also at the same time, because that we have a lot of folks that's working remotely, the activities are lower, our expenditure rate has been quite a bit slower as well. So we're running expenditures at a much slower rate than the revenue compared to the years before. On the central services side, we're starting to get a little concerned just because that both, let's look at the revenue first. It's fair to say that's significant in the sense of central services, lower than prior years. And that's actually a good news for sustainability. That's heavily dedicated to our escalated remote working level, and then much lower usage of printers and copiers on paper, on ink, on all the supplies that goes into that, and that actually affects central services revenue. At the same time, central services is our printing and distribution. So, yeah. Yes, and then we have actually been controlling and managing our expenditures in that area, both from supply savings and also as we have not have the need to use our seasonal temporary staff to come in to do certain print jobs for that. So we were able to keep the expenditure at a lower rate as well. You can see we are still monitoring that very closely as the year progresses, because we do have permanent regular employees. That's part of the cost, and then we're continuing to monitor the usage of the county. So that's one area that we're keeping a close eye on. So. Next slide, please. And then we have a public safety and justice area, and all three larger special funds. Fund 234, the local option levy. Fund 182, the district patrol, which is the area that gets in the ESPD revenues for patrol services. And then the Fund 188, the community corrections. And all three funds are tracking fairly well against last year's spend rate and revenue rate. For community corrections, even the revenue came in a little faster than last year. If you remember in our previous financial updates, there was this timing difference between the state's biennial budget of their timing of revenue coming in, and that is a part of we were coming in a little slower last year, and then this year it's coming in a little faster.
Couple of questions on this. So the district patrol, that includes both the rural and the ESPD UUA
Correct.
costs, right?
Yep.
Then on community corrections, through our budget, when we adopted this year's budget, we essentially backfilled the gap in costs from the state, that the state's no longer covering. So since that's coming, those revenues come in on our timing
Right.
versus delayed state timing, might that also have an impact?
That's definitely part of the reason as well, because our transfer revenue actually is run on a monthly basis, so we're on a much more even schedule.
Thank you.
Yep. Thank you. Very good questions. Next slide, please. And then land use and transportation. This is an area where there's a couple areas where it's starting to be concerning. Starting with the road fund, it's actually the larger special fund on the LUT side. We can see that the revenue has dipped quite a bit in that area, and that is contributing definitely to the pandemic. It's partially a state revenue, allocated revenue to us has been lowered, and also the vehicle registration fee has came down quite a bit in that area. I know that in this whole area, LUT is preparing for a board briefing in 2 weeks on October 27th, so there will be more details provided in that briefing. So that's definitely an area we're keeping a close eye on. And if we look at the expenditure side, they actually have managed the expenditure compared to the prior years to a much lower level, slower burn rate compared to the last years, like 16%, 15%, they controlled it at 12%. So we know that staff is doing active management when it comes to financial conditions. And then looking at current planning, there's the number doesn't really show any concern yet from a percentage perspective. Actually, this year's revenue percentage is even a little bit higher than last year's. But if you look at the actual dollar amount, we're looking at $449,000 compared to last year's $500,000. And then the budgeted amount is $4 million versus $5.2 million in the last couple of years. So the business model in this area has been a slower declining, which is part of the cyclical changes in this area. So a little concerning. They're not as concerning as the road fund, but it's definitely part of the LUT's financial management strategy. And then on the expenditure side, I believe the story is still the same as the last time I brought a financial update. Is that a slightly higher percentage represents actually a more fully recruited team compared to the years before, where they had ran higher vacancy rate in the years before. That's for current planning. And then come to building services, again, we're looking at the revenue at a slight lower rate by now. And the percentage, I guess we can call it a slight decline, but then if you look at the dollar amount, we're looking at close to $1.4 million versus almost $1.8 million. So almost a $500,000 hit in 3 months compared to the years before. So it's definitely another area of concern. And again, LUT will bring a much more detailed briefing to your board in 2 weeks on that.
I just want to make sure that for that briefing, given that long-range planning is funded through the lottery program, that it's also included in that briefing. That's all.
Yes.
Great, thanks.
Thank you. Next slide, please. For housing, health, and human services, first we start with housing. The Department of Housing Services has been very stable. We can see that their revenue is coming in well on track, and then their expenditure actually was managed to a lower level spend rate compared to the years before. So housing is doing a really good job managing their finances within the department. And then the Metro Affordable Housing Bond, which is the newer fund that we set up for the Metro Affordable Housing Bond program. And obviously the comparison to the prior 2 years is not really representing any normal level. I just want to point out that you may have a question about, why do we have a negative revenue into the new year? That is purely based on an accounting adjustment of interest earned last year and then having that reversal this year. So it's going to be balanced out by this year's adjustment in due time. But just because that we're super early in the year, there hasn't been any other activities, so that negative accounting adjustment is still on the books, representing a negative revenue. Nothing to be concerned there. Next slide, please. Looking at HHS, the larger special funds are Human Services and Health Share of Oregon. On the Human Services side, we can see that there's a significant difference in revenue, both in dollars and percentage, about $34 million or so, and that is the timing difference of the grant revenue carry forward. I was mentioning earlier, it's truly an accounting timing difference that hasn't happened in our books yet. So nothing to be concerned of. We definitely flagged it to look deeper into it. And then on the Health Share of Oregon side, the revenue is also coming at a significant lower rate. And the story behind that is we did some business model restructuring by creating a new fund, which is the Fund 203. And that actually has split out quite a bit of the business model out of Fund 195. So when I look at the Fund 203 revenue, there's about $2.3 million in there, which is lower than prior years, but that's still due to the new business model. So when I check with HHS, they're not too concerned about the slight difference there. It's not as significant as what we're seeing in the number here. So, next slide, please. Cultural education and recreation, this is another area where we have the co-op library services, which is very stable, managed really well. All the numbers are happening fairly on target compared to the years before. Fair complex is the area where we can't help but be experiencing the impact of the TLT revenue that's coming in, not having the annual fair, not having that revenue coming in. So that's where you can see that the revenue side is significantly lower than the years before in the first 3 months of the year. And obviously, active financial management is being practiced at the fair complex by the leadership team there, and our cost is managed even at a lower level than the revenue level, 4% on the revenue and 2.7% of the cost. So fair complex is doing a good job managing through the pandemic. And then for the event center operations, we were anticipating, we budgeted $1.5 million in revenue. It's just not happening yet. So revenue at a significant lower level, and expenditure at the same time is also at a significant lower level. Next slide, please.
Jack, just a quick question. Staying with that event center, realizing that we are now utilizing some of that space for courtrooms, is that going to, I don't know, in some way reallocate some, is there going to be any revenue stream from that at all? And is that going to be reflected in the event center?
Yes, absolutely. We're anticipating the revenue coming in for the state courtroom to help with the event center's revenue side as well.
Do we have any idea? I mean, how long are we going to be able to maintain this?
If I can respond to that. We will be providing you a full overview of that operation and the Wingspan Events Center and Fair within the next couple months. I will say what is helpful in this space is that we've been able to redeploy most of the staff to other operations. It is important to note that we are using COVID funding to be able to do that through the end of the year. So we're actively working on what does that plan look like for January through May or June, because otherwise we're not going to have enough staff, in essence, to operate the fair. So we're trying to figure out what that plan looks like, and we'll bring that back to the board. We, right now, if I recall the number correctly, all of the costs to operate the courts at the Wingspan is about $1.2 million. Much of that is the lease cost that we're able to charge because the court is occupying the full space on a 24/7 basis.
Okay, so that's a good deal to helping our revenue stream on that.
Yes, yes. And for the courts, from a community facing, what's the value to the community is it helps relieve the backlog that the court's experiencing on the docket. If we weren't able to use Wingspan and with the COVID protocols, we would still have that backlog through at some point, hopefully next year. So this is very beneficial for the courts.
This is a great idea.
Well, just to clarify, to be very clear, the state doesn't provide any revenue for space. We provide it. And so any monies being received that we're saying we're getting it is all from the CARES money. Once that runs out on December 31, where's the revenue then going to come? And I guess that's the report, because
Correct.
we're either going to have a facility we can't rent because we're using it for court, and we're going to have a big dive in revenue, or we're going to have to figure something out. And that may be where you were going with it, but
Yes, that's a good point, Roy. I, for some reason, I thought that the state was supporting our judicial system in that, so that's not the case. So, all right, but still, it's, I'm told the facility is beautiful, and it's going to be a magnificent court system that we have in our event center. Not something we certainly planned, but it's a good use of that space, so I'm glad we'll be able to do that.
Not forever.
No, not forever, but certainly would help us with our backlog.
Thank you. Very good questions. And any other questions? Oh, actually, I still have one more slide to go. So to sum up, we have some anticipated near-term revenue impacts, and the CEO and the support services finance team has been collecting information from various departments of where are we anticipating, whether from the state level, from the business level, what are some of those revenue impacts. And these are are a few higher dollar amount, higher impact items for us to be just mindful of. Is we have the transient lodging tax, that's definitely up to $4.3 million shortfall overall, and the general fund portion of that is $3.7 million. The fair complex portion is $0.6 million, which is, while that looks like a comparatively smaller number, it's very impactful to the fair complex operations. And I want you to be aware that when we were building the fiscal year 2021 budget, on the general fund side, we definitely anticipated this type of revenue shortfall. So it's already built into our financial forecast. And this is in a sense, this is not changing our general fund balance trend compared to the last version that you're seeing it. So this has been part of our anticipation when we're building the budget. Is there any questions?
So I understand your point on the general fund. For the lottery fund, with regard to this shortfall falling in this range, we had estimated a 4.5% revenue increase for lottery fund for this budget year for a total of $2.6 million. So that 4.5% equated to $117K. So, depending upon where the shortfall is, it either wipes out that revenue increase that we expected, which sort of aligns with costs,
Right.
Or it's double that. So I pulled all the information out of the adopted budget, and I think it's really a useful exercise, particularly for us to look at page 278. So.
Absolutely. So the video lottery is one area that we didn't anticipate as huge as a hit during the budget, but this shortfall is actually compared to our budgeted amount, so rather than last year's amount. So you're right. We may be able to absorb the shortfall in the growth that we assumed in the budget. And LUT, that story is obviously we're experiencing a lot of revenue impact there, up to $15 million in total, and that's something that both CAO and the LET are working actively on coming up with measures. Measure 110 is another one that we're keeping a close eye on. What we got from the government relations team is that it could potentially impact community corrections revenue by $2 million.
Which is a double whammy because we're already, in this adopted budget, covered the previous shortfall. So, I'm glad that we did what we did because that's a really important community service, meeting the needs to make sure that folks are successful in returning to the community. I think very highly of the community corrections program, but our state legislators can't just assume that they can cut, and we can make up for that. So this is really very concerning.
Well, I would agree, and I just found out about this last week, and I'm wondering why we didn't, I guess, make more of a concern about this. I mean, realizing Measure 110 is sounds like a good idea on paper, but if it works out to be a $2 million hit on us, then it can't be all that great of an idea. So there must be some. I'd like to think there's a better way of getting both without impacting us financially. So, when did we make the calculations that this was going to be a $2 million hit, and why didn't we, I guess, communicate that more publicly?
Well, that's actually really a government relations team's question that I actually don't have the background to answer, and I can definitely bring the question back, and the team can either follow up in writing or include that in the next legislative update.
Yeah. Okay.
Well, and for clarity, the point that I was making wasn't, as I understand it, related to the Measure 110 hit. Mm-hmm. This is more Measure 110. The hit that I was referring to is the fact that the legislature did not adopt the actual cost study for the second cycle in a row. And the actual cost study sets an average rate that is lower. It's a statewide average, and it's lower than what our urban areas need. So we really get hit hard. And I made as much of a stink as I thought I could make, at the same time of making sure that our community corrections team knows that the criticism that I have is directed at the state legislative level. And I wanted to make sure as we went through the AOC legislative agenda, as you heard at the District 8 meeting, that we're still pushing back on that. And it is there in the legislative agenda that we reviewed yesterday. So we'll just keep pushing it.
All front, we have definitely a lot of revenue items to push at the state level. Thank you. Very good question. Oh, Tanya, go ahead.
If I can just provide a little bit of clarification on Measure 110. Measure 110 is actually a ballot-initiated process, so brought forward by the residents of the state. And so, of course, that's very different than a legislative process, so I just want to draw that distinction. When GR comes forward with the legislative agenda, which is scheduled for next week, they're planning to add this, and Jajit has been tracking this, and will speak to this measure and more specifics of what the sources are, which is marijuana tax and redirecting of that marijuana tax utilization for corrections to rehab programs. So the board is briefed on that. I do want to just once again draw that distinction that this is an initiative measure versus a legislative measure.
Yeah, I'm aware of
Okay.
that was an initiative, and again, just like a good number of other initiatives, it's a good idea in concept, but nobody ever drills down to see what's the impact locally. And so I realize, that this is a voter-initiated thing, and I think it's just unfortunate that we as the organization that's going to be impacted by this $2 million hit needed to, I think, get out ahead of this at least and state why we were opposed to this, although conceptually it's a good idea.
Yep.
So again, it's a frustration about the initiative process from my standpoint.
Can I just add just another bit of context to this slide? Staff, GR, and support services, the finance team, are actively monitoring state revenues, the legislative agenda, and we anticipate that there will be additional impacts to county revenues. We don't know what the crystal ball holds, and so this information will be continuing to emerge, and we'll be bringing that to the board as soon as we have information.
Is that your last slide?
Quick question?
Is that your last slide? Because I have questions.
Yeah,
For
go
this
for it.
for this part, yes.
Go ahead. No, I didn't.
Well, mine is a little tangential, and that is, I received my state voters pamphlet at home, and we have 2 separate books this year as opposed to a county inserted inside the state because of the thickness. I don't know that that's happened before, but nonetheless. So I'm absorbing the number of items that are on the ballot prior to the ballot actually arriving. And I see some that I'm not sure if they have a county revenue impact or not. And what I mean by that, there's at least one item where I have a sense that it's shifting money from one program that serves our community to potentially another program. And I'm a little uncomfortable about doing that through an initiative ballot box as opposed to a deliberative legislative session where it's clear what the trade-offs are. And so I'm not sure what questions I should be asking and in what venues to understand the impact of that. So I don't know if I'm being fair in asking our staff about that or not. So that's why I say it's tangential, because I'm afraid it impacts public safety and HHS.
Those books are on my kitchen counter and feeling a bit overwhelming, I will say, to read through those. But our staff team can review those and get back to the board on any areas of concern that we may have.
Okay. I'll try and do a better job of looking before a work session next week. But ballots do drop in the mail tomorrow.
My comment, question combined is, you always do a nice job, Jack. I thank you for the information. It's a lot of information, but most of it's all based upon actual. You're comparing numbers on an accrual basis, I understand, so it's not cash, it's on accrual, but accrual basis, you're comparing to budget. I really don't know what the commitments are. We chatted a bit about that yesterday on a different subject, but so I have no idea how much more is committed, and those numbers are going to get worse. I have no idea really what we're forecasting locally, not statewide, but locally in terms of ending numbers and ending, because these aren't projections. I mean, as you and I know, or Jerry would know, in the CPA world, these aren't projections. You're just comparing what you have on this particular day without making your life miserable, because I know you're doing two jobs, and you're doing literally two different jobs, and you're also doing a lot of extra stuff. Is there a way on a higher level, I'm not saying line item, that's just too detailed, a higher level to say, what are we really projecting? What, with all we know, all the encumbrances, all of the commitments that we've made, what do we really think it's going to look like? Because in talking on a professional side to other counties, I mean, they're having a different experience. We have $104 million that we got from federal money that they don't have. And so they're really cutting costs in terms of staffing, in terms of programs, not because they want to. They really, really don't want to, but because they don't have the money. So I'm just kind of saying, where are we going to be? Is that possible?
So Commissioner Rogers, what you're asking for isn't a financial forecast, but it's a managerial forecast?
Could be.
Which is something that we would be turning to our management team, because we have an adopted budget which has adopted programs and anticipated spending commitments. And what we're trying to get the lay of the land for is what, given the financial landscape, what are some of the operational impacts that we may have based upon a change in financial circumstances. That really gets down to managerial assessment, and I'm very familiar with this coming out of the metro world for 12 years, where we had both our financial forecasts and our quarterly managerial updates.
Yeah, no, I agree. That's
So
well,
that
that's well stated.
We had the infrastructure in place to manage through that.
In the accounting world, though, we have projections, and that's what I was specifically. The managerial side is, what are we going to have to do now that we know? But on our accounting side, projections, what's it going to look like coming up? Because if that $104 million is hopefully dispersed and gone, we don't have money to do some of the programs, and how we're going to. So what's it going to look like as your projection? If two things, a contingency, what's it going to look like if COVID hits again? Yeah, and you don't know. I know, you just wild guess, but what's the money looking inside? Then we got to make, as the chair points out, well, that it's a managerial decision after that. But anyway, I just don't have any idea from what you presented where.
Thank you, Commissioner Rogers. There are actually three efforts that may answer your question. So on one side is in the next section of this presentation, I actually do have the general fund forecast, which is more of our discretionary allocations. And that's only on our general fund, quote unquote, normal business side. And on the special side is there is we're discussing on reviewing the CARES Act CRF spending rate up to date, and how do we project till the end of the year, and if there's any reallocation that's needed. So the effort is going on, and we'll be bringing a briefing to the board currently tentatively on November 3rd. And also, in addition to that, Tanya, our county administrator, is also leading an effort to look further into the future, into that January through June timeline for fiscal year 2021, and then even beyond this fiscal year into next fiscal year. So I don't know the timing on that yet, but when that effort is fairly complete, it will be brought to the board for briefing.
And the other thing that we, as a board, occasionally have articulated is wanting our staff, whether it's financial staff or government relations team or even our county administrator, to look at the crystal ball and project, well, what should we expect in a changing world from the state? What should we expect from the changing world with the feds? And right now, crystal balls, forget them. We got what we got, and we're just going to be on this journey. And maybe we'll have another CARES Act, HEROES Act, Good News Act. Who knows? We'll see what happens.
Yeah.
I'm confident that we've got a great team who will help us manage through this no matter what.
Thank you, Chair Harrington. Thank you, Commissioner Rogers, for your question. Any other questions for this section before we go on to the next section?
I think we're anxious to get to the next section.
All right, next section. Next slide, please. So general fund 5-year forecast. Next slide, please. And let's walk through the assumptions first, just as a reminder of what goes into our forecast. As the chair describes, there is a crystal ball. These are actually the parts of the crystal ball that we use to try to look as far ahead into the future based on the best of our knowledge. So on the assessed value front, which is a significant part of the general fund revenue, fiscal year 2021 assumption when I prepared this presentation was 4.5%, and our tax bureau just recently finalized their number, and we're right on the dot of that 4.5%, even slightly higher than that, but not significantly higher.
Our adopted budget was based on 4.5%.
Correct. So that number is not going to fluctuate, assuming that our collection rate remains stable. That number is not going to fluctuate very much.
Yeah, that's, I was asked that question the other day. What did we usually assume collection rate of 97 or
96%.
Yeah, 96, and we budgeted 92 or something, didn't we?
No, we budgeted 96% as well into our budget, and we assumed. So there's a little part where I talk about revenue collections. We assumed a 2% drop from across the board of revenue collections, and right now, I think what is making that fairly true to the case is really TLT. Because TLT accounts for a certain percentage of the revenue fund, and the experience that we're experiencing right now, we're anticipating that we're going to actually land on that 2% fairly close.
Okay. Yeah, thank you.
So 4.5% for 2021, and then we're assuming 4%, taking a more conservative approach into 21, 22, 22, 23. And then even more conservative approach in 23, 24, 24, 25 at 3.5%. Obviously, we'll continue to monitor that and update it as we see things change. There is a 2% assumed increase when the 2005 SIP ends in fiscal year 2025, and that's when the SIP property that's not currently on tax roll gets on the tax roll during that time. Transient lodging tax growth, we had pre-pandemic, we had a 2% growth assumption at the time, and then right now we're truing that up to a 75% dip into the fiscal year 2021. As I have presented to you, that our actual numbers coming in is really supporting that 75% dip. And then we're also assuming into fiscal year 2021-22, it's going to grow back. Hopefully that will be fully reopened by then, grow back to 75% of pre-COVID level. And then we're assuming that it will take us till 2023 to grow all the way back to the 100% pre-COVID level.
So I know in future quarters we'll be getting similar reports. Can we make sure that in something like this TLT that we have the percentage that was in the adopted budget?
Okay.
So we've got that comparison. That'd be
Yes,
great.
we can definitely do that. And then on the other revenues changes, there's for the fiscal year 2021, fiscal year 21-22, the overall revenue collection we're assuming to be reduced by 1%. And I mentioned a moment ago, when we did the budget, we assumed 2%. That is before we trued up the TLT impact. So now that we true up the TLT impact at the 75%, really the rest of the revenue is we're experiencing a 1%, assuming a 1% collection reduction, and adding that on top of the TLT is still equals to about that 2%. So in a sense, our assumption of revenue collection has not changed for fiscal year 2021. And what did change a little bit is that because this ongoing pandemic, if you guys recall back in the spring when we were actively working on the budget, we were still fairly optimistic, let's say, that we would be in a much better place by the end of the summer. The reality is that we're not quite there yet. So we're anticipating a prolonged revenue impact into next year, which is fiscal year 21-22. So we're assuming another 1% revenue collection impact into the next fiscal year as the economy continue to recover. And we're assuming by fiscal year 22-23, the revenue collection rate will return to our normal level before pandemic. Next slide, please.
What percentage is the SIP of that bump that you're talking about? So if the SIP doesn't.
So by our previous experience, it's about 2% of AV growth, so additional 2% of AV.
So if the SIP doesn't expire.
It's set to expire in 2020.
That doesn't mean that you won't get lawsuits saying that the assets are no, it's only on personal property anyway. So if
Correct.
they say the assets are worthless and so it doesn't matter, I'm going to contend my property tax assessment because I don't have the value you claim, or I move my operations, or a lot of things could happen. So I'm just trying to understand what that percentage is in there. There's a lot to be said when that thing starts.
Absolutely. That is definitely a possible case. It hasn't been our experience in the last couple of times when the previous SIP expired. So that's why we made an assumption based on historical events.
I get it. I just,
Yes, but what you're describing is definitely a possible scenario. So, thank you, Commissioner Rogers.
So Jack, again, in the future when we have these, if you could put a dollar number beside some of these, a 1% doesn't, a 1% doesn't sound like very much, but I have a feeling that it's a fairly significant dollar number. So if you could maybe include some estimated dollars in there, I'd have a better sense of
Absolutely.
what the impact this is going to be.
I can definitely include it on the slides. I'm trying to balance not to make the slide too busy, but also bringing useful information for your consideration, so I'll definitely incorporate that. Just right off the top of my head, I know that when we look at the 1% on the general fund revenue plus that 75% of TLT hit, what we're assuming is about $6 million in general fund revenue impact altogether. About.
That's a better number.
Okay. No problem. Thank you, Commissioner Willie. Next slide. Expenditure assumptions. We're still assuming zero FTE growth for fiscal year 22-25 through fiscal year 25, and that we know that number may fluctuate up and down a little bit. Well, probably not down, but up a little bit, and we are still assuming that we, from the CEO level, from the board level, we're going to try to control that at a minimum level, and then on the COLA side, we have 2.5% annually assumption for COLA going into the next 4 years. Other salary increases is 1.5%. That is our step increases for existing employees, any salary adjustments based on market research. Health benefit is assumed to grow at 4% annually. And then also overall budget reduction is assumed to have a 2% for the next 3 years after hard increases. And again, those are all the same assumption from the budget season. Yeah. And yes, and required actual spending at 94%, which has been the county's tradition for a while. On the material and services side, we're also assuming zero growth into fiscal year 22-25. Overall budget reduction is also 2% on the M&S side for the next 3 years, and then required actual spending at 90%, which is in line with the county's required spending in the past. On the other side, which includes the capital, debt services, and transfers, those we have to assume 100% according to budget because we budget at 100% for those spendings. Next slide, please. So on the capital investment assumptions, it's we actually have changed our capital investment assumptions into the next couple of years. On the facility side, before fiscal year 2021 and the pandemic, our 1920 level was $5 million. And then due to the pandemic, due to the economic impact and the revenue impact, we have reduced the facility capital investment for fiscal year 2021 and 21-22 to $3 million. And that is in sync with what we budgeted for this fiscal year. 22-23 to 24-25, we anticipate if we experience a slow recovery, that's going to go down to even $2 million. Obviously, those numbers can change as situation and the economic factors changes. So, but right now, those are our assumptions looking to the next couple of years. On the ITS side, we have a $3.5 million back in 1920, and that was reduced to $2 million to help the county maintain general fund balance for fiscal year 2021, 21-22, and then it was anticipated to reduce to $1 million for 22-23 and 24-25 on new projects. So this was not specifically highlighted in my last update, but I thought that it's important to bring it. But this is part of the fiscal year 2021 budget that we built into the budget. Any questions?
Yes, so when I was looking at this presentation before the meeting, I decided not to dive into this number and wait to see you present it. So I'm still not clear if these are the assumptions we adopted or if these are changes to what we adopted,
These are in sync with what we adopted.
Okay, all right. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next slide.
Jack, before we move on, can we go back to that slide?
Absolutely.
Chair Harrington, and for the board's information, I do want to flag this slide because to me, this is a very significant slide as we look at the facilities capital and we are embarking on a facility strategic plan. In addition, I'm not prepared to come before the board, but I will say from my initial cursory view, I will be bringing forward in the future investments in ITS capital. And so I just want to flag this for your information. Jack and I have had conversation about this, and since this is a forecast, to me, this is a point in time, but we may need to come back and review this in the future.
I'll say I'm not at all surprised. I just want to make sure that as we move forward, I'm clear on what the landscape was when we adopted the budget versus where we see the landscape now. The other thing that I'm aware of is I'm really pleased that operationally the county, like private sector and local government everywhere, has been nimble and really pivoted to move towards more internet-based meetings, but there's a back end to support that, which is different than what we forecasted in our adopted budget. And frankly, I don't see those forums changing. So yes, we might, for example, get back to having some in-person community engagement, but I think we're going to want to still keep our web-based, I'm not going to call them virtual because we're not virtual people, but our web-based interactions and applications, and therefore we need to carry that infrastructure forward, whether it's hardware, software, or otherwise.
Absolutely, that is our plan. In fact, we're also in the process of adding more hardware into the work session room, so we have more options as far as the location.
I have a question for Ms. Angie. So you're saying that you'd like to put a flag on this because you see different needs into the future than we may have anticipated previously? And I assume that means increase.
Potentially. And what we don't know yet is what we will discover through the facilities strategic plan. So I just want to flag that.
Sure.
And at the same time, I think it's fiscally prudent during downturns to slow your capital spending. From an ITS capital, there are significant efficiencies and also public-facing services that can be found as we move forward with our website redesign and really look at our website as the front door service to the county. So what that means to complementary applications for departments, we don't know at this time. So it's for future conversation. I just wanted to take this opportunity to raise it.
Thank you. And that was going to be my question. Does this include the web front door, to use your terminology? So great, thank you.
Thank you. I'll put on my Director of Support Services hat for a minute. Is County Administrator Tanya Angie is definitely correct. This is our changing assumption to be financially prudent when we look into our forecast. We would definitely always advocate for the county's infrastructure, for both from the facility side and the ITS side when there is funding opportunities available and the business need is there. So that's part of our regular work. Thank you. Next slide, please. And so there are some assumptions that has changed from when our fiscal year 2021 budget adoption to this financial number one. And the one thing that changed significantly is TLT. We were assuming a 2% growth, and then now we're really realizing a 75% drop. And then the other one is for the fiscal year, for next fiscal year 21-22, we were assuming that our revenue collection is going to get back to normal level. We're taking a conservative road to get assuming 1% dip in there. The last, which is a very impactful one, is we were assuming a much higher PERS rate. The PERS just issued their next biennial rate for fiscal year 21-22, 22-23, and the number came in a lot better than what we anticipated, partially due to their robust 2019 return that they had. 2020 might be a different story, but we're writing on their next biennial assumption right now. And also part of the Senate Bill 1049, where they redirected a large part of the IAP, while there's still debates and questions about how well that program is running, is definitely being reflected in the employer rate that we're experiencing. So between that, we're actually looking at a better financial picture just on that one assumption. So next slide, please. That's where our chart happens, is that you can see that the trend is still fairly similar to what we experienced as a budget adoption. We're still seeing a little bit of a dip into fiscal year 21-22, which is kind of our low point, and then assumed to come back up in 22-23 and quickly get back to the 15% fund balance level in 23-24. If you recall correctly, we were about 1% lower during the budget adoption, where we're getting into the 10% range, a little bit above 10% range for 2 years before coming back up. Now we're actually going to land the plan in 2021 with all the assumptions being correct on the 15%, dip a little down into the fund balance into the 11% range, and then quickly come back to 12% and then 15% in the next 3 years, rather than a 5-year recovery. So that's the crystal ball that, as far as we can see at this moment.
That's, compared to our peers, staying above 10%, woohoo! I'm pretty pleased.
So definitely looking a little bit better back in our forecast as well. That's the last slide for this section. Next slide, please. Any questions for the general fund forecast?
Have you looked at full costing of benefits for employees? You're showing a slight dip in PERS because of their projected investment earnings. Are those going to be offset by, for instance, insurance costs and other benefits?
Yes, so all of the benefits is part of our assumption. Our health insurance is projected to have a 4% increase. As far as cost goes, we're experiencing actually a slightly lower percentage increase than that. So it's not significant enough to really highlight and change our assumption at this moment, but we're not seeing any concerns in those other benefit areas. Yeah. Any other questions for the general fund forecast before we move on? Right, next part, please. Next slide. So I just want to quickly highlight the factors that we continue to look out for when it comes to navigating our financial future. And starting with the external factors, the economic recovery in the state and the Washington County is the number one thing that we're looking out for. The employment rate, how the businesses are doing, we're definitely keeping a close eye. Federal and state funding changes, this includes legislations, any ballot measures, any new grants opportunities that comes up, and we're keeping a very close eye to that. Assessed value growth and property tax collection rate is actually our bread and butter in general fund, and that's something that we keep a very close eye to. TLT recovery, obviously, is impactful for general fund in a small percentage, but very impactful for fair complex operations. That's something that we keep a close eye on. PERS employee year rate, we were actually reading the PERS board package before the PERS board, like on the first day of the package coming out before the board was happening. So we're definitely keep an eye out for that. They have an update in December to do their PERS rate and PERS funding forecast. So we're going to be keeping a close eye to that December update as well. Community priorities and needs. That is always the driving factor of the county's business and the county's budget. So we're, along with the board, along with the CEO, we'll definitely continue to look out for that. Those are the external factors. Next slide, please. And then looking at the internal factors is our internal FTE growth rate. I can't stress enough that's our number one cost driver is our FTE, and that's definitely going to be impactful for our financial future into the future, and then our financial outlook into the future, and then our departmental budget to actual spend rate. That's another area to look at is we have assumed a 94% spend rate on personnel cost, 90% spend rate on material and services. So that's an area where we need to continue to look at each department and make sure that's managed to the expectation. Sustainable business and program models, as many of our businesses and programs are changing business models as our funding resources are continue to being challenged by the state, by the feds, by the business model itself. This is something that actually we're encouraging department to continue to do, to look at the business model not only for the next budget year, but for the next 5 years, 10 years, to build a sustainable business model that will continue to deliver service and continue to be able to maintain a float. And the operational efficiency is something that Tanya just mentioned. It's very high on her list, and that's something that we can continue to pursue to find ways to either save costs or build efficiency and create more service delivery values to the community. And last but not least, I have to point back to emergency preparedness, is how well can we prepare for a pandemic like this, for earthquake event, for any type of emergency, is going to actually change our cost numbers tremendously for future references. So we're, in support services, actually going to step up the game on helping the county to continue to do better in emergency preparedness. So those are the internal and external factors. Any questions in this area?
Did I catch that correctly? In terms of the internal FTE growth rate, did I see that as 0%?
That was assumed to be at 0%. It's our during the pandemic, it's our recommendation to have that zero growth FTE.
So, I'm sorry, so for what time period are we talking about this 0% FTE then?
That's for, if I recall correctly, that's for the next, assumed to be the next 3 to 4 years.
The next 3 to 4 years, okay. But the county will continue to grow in population, so how will we manage to do that?
So my recommendation would be to utilize our vacancy rate and continue to look at our business model. And the reality is that if we were to grow too fast, our FTEs, our fund balance chart is not going to look the same. Actually, in our scenarios of FTE continue to grow at 2% a year for the next 3 years, our fund balance chart looks very scary. So that's definitely my recommendation for your consideration. Obviously, we have levers to look at as our PERS rate. All this other cost factor comes in. We may be able to create more room for other areas to look at, whether if your board wants to invest in FTE or capital projects or new programs or the community economic relief. Those are all consideration points.
I think there's also a refinement point on this. The local option levy special funds funded headcount does have some growth in it. Definitely for general fund funded headcount, it's at 0%. But things like through the public safety levy, there are certain assumptions about revenue growth and service growth, as well as with ESPD. So it's not across the board at 0, but definitely general fund versus special fund.
Thank you, Chair Harrington. That is an important distinction as well. Thank you.
Jack, can I just add a commentary there too?
Absolutely.
I don't see FTE separate from sustainable business, program models, or operational efficiency. I see that they're all tied together, and it will be very important for our departments to really look at how we're delivering business and meeting community needs and priorities, and looking at alternative ways of doing that. That may involve technology, that may involve changing how we deliver that service to meet the priorities and needs. So I really see that as interrelated. So I wouldn't just focus on the FTE. I would look for the board support in challenging staff to really look at how we can evolve our services.
Thank you. Any other questions for this section? All right, next slide, please. Next one. So in the next section, we're going to discuss the budget timeline, and it has changed a little bit since the last time I presented to you. So we'll just dive right in. Next slide. Starting in the July to September timeframe, which has already passed, that's where CEO and Support Services Finance is leading the fiscal year 2021 financial information gathering and the monitoring and planning. And that is actually the effort that has brought a lot of the information I presented earlier about some of our revenue concerns, about what are our assumptions, true-ups, and how does that affect both the general fund and the county in our financial perspective. And next slide, please. October to December 2020, and starting from October 1st through the middle of November, that's where CEO and Support Services Finance continue to work with departments on financial information gathering, monitoring, and planning. The intention for that is to continue to bring informative information back to your board on how the county is doing financially. October 13th is our first financial update, which is today, which includes the county's current financial conditions and a summary of the state September economic update. October 27th is when we are bringing to your board of our fall fiscal year 2021 budget adjustments. And there's a few items in there that's mostly related with carry forward items from fiscal year 1920 into 2021. And then there are various dates that it's currently being worked on for the community investment conversations. We had some dates before, but because of logistic reasons that we are rethinking of the timing of those community investment conversations. From November 1 to December 31st, that is where your board is spending time to discuss county priorities, goals, directions, and then continue to share this information with staff so staff can build a plan to develop the budget into next year. And then November 17th, that's I believe that day has moved, but that was there when I made this presentation. There was supposed to be a work session briefing on community investment conversations, but again, I believe that day is moving to a different date based on the finalized date for the community investment conversations. December 8th, we have a work session briefing on county's near-term financial operation plan to address anticipated revenue impacts, and that is also a tentative date placeholder, and that is for Tanya to work with staff and come up with a plan to address the January through June pandemic response or any other financial or business impacts that we're experiencing into the rest of the fiscal year. Next slide, please. For January through March, starting in January, that's where we are hoping to get some budget instructions to departments, and that will be preliminary budget instructions. What that means is the revenue growth, expenditure growth or reduction, and those are information that's key to the departments to start building the budget. From February 1st to the end of the month, that's where departments starting to develop their fiscal year 21-22 request budget, but also at the same time work on their fiscal year 2021 budget adjustments for the spring timeline. And I definitely anticipate that there's budget adjustments that may relate to the CEO-led effort of how do we navigate our financial situations into the second half of the fiscal year. And then for the Board of Commissioners, we have the financial update scheduled for February 2nd for the second update, and that will have our near-term financial conditions and then also progress on the financial operation plans into the spring and the second half of the fiscal year.
That's a work session, right?
That's a work session. And then for March 16th, we have adopted fiscal year 2021 spring budget adjustments reflecting the financial operations plan. And then for March 22nd to April 2nd, that's when the departments, for that 2 weeks period, that's where departments present their budget to CAO, so CAO can formally start drafting the county administrator's proposed budget for fiscal year 21-22.
I think for me, on February 2nd work session, just from a human standpoint, in terms of how we've been navigating the continued evolution of the new coronavirus through our community. We've got all kinds of theories, or there are various theories about the presence of flu. I think I'm going to make a mental note for myself to really checkpoint things February 2nd. We will have gone through the months of December and January, which for me feels like the two winter months, even though December is still technically the fall season. Really to see how does the new year feel, 2021. So just a heads up on that. I appreciate seeing that stake in the ground.
Right.
But it'll give a chance to really wear that sweater of January and see which end is up and what is the new normal feel like then. Commissioner Treese.
Jack, could you go back one slide, please?
Yes.
I know we're going to have a discussion on the community investment. We're going to have that conversation this afternoon, later this morning. My concern is that is there enough time built into this timeline? I suspect that the degree of information that we're going to get this year is going to be very different than what we experienced last year. And I just want to make sure that we are prepared to adequately respond. We saw that through the listening sessions. That's my concern there. It doesn't look like we've got enough time, but what would constitute enough time, I don't know. But I'm raising the flag of concern there.
Absolutely, and thank you. Your point is definitely well taken. So when we're building this timeline, it can definitely also shift based on what's the current event. The one thing that we're working with is obviously the state of Oregon's statutory requirement on budget adoption timeline. Mm-hmm. So there's absolutely staff work and a part of that project management timeline that is fairly stable. So, but that doesn't mean that in small ways that we can shift the timeline front or back. In addition to that, is part of our formal budget adoption process as well as 3 times a year budget adjustment process to really build our process into a continuous budget financial management process rather than really just one opportunity a year to reflect any changes of your priorities and your directions. So I definitely don't want to misrepresent that this fiscal year 21-22 is the only time to make any change or move any needles in terms of directions and priorities.
But Jack, if I may add to Commissioner Treese in response to that, I've really appreciated the conversations with Jack and Elizabeth on this subject, and we feel very confident that the community investment timeline that you'll hear this afternoon will completely fit into our budget process. We don't feel that we need to have the investment conversation and then start the budget process.
Right.
We can take budget input throughout the entire process and determine how how we can meet the community needs and priorities, and then provide that follow-up.
And thank you. I'm just raising the concern here and just making sure that we're all on the same page.
Definitely.
I would just echo the Commissioner's comments. There's an expectation, at least last year, there was an expectation that somehow we had extra money and there could be new programs, we could do all these things. And I suspect we can, but to me, it's a net sum.
Zero-sum.
Zero, yeah, there we go, thank you.
Zero-sum game.
Yeah, thank you. It was, if you're telling us we don't really have the money, are we going to, in these meetings, say, okay, if you want something additional, what do you want us to cut? I mean, I think that's what Pam was getting at, the expectations of people. And I mean, this is so soon, and we don't even know. So it's a great comment.
Well, the other, and we can get into this more in the afternoon, the other thing that we have to live and breathe on a regular basis is there's the general fund and then there are special funds, right? The community in May 19th, passed a public safety levy, right? It's voter approved. And that included allocations in there. The cooperative library levy included allocations, and then revenue that flows from the state. So while it may sound interesting that we have a $1.4 billion budget, the numbers that are at play are very different than otherwise. So we're still learning how to have a fruitful conversation with different members of our community and to help bring them along in terms of the enormity of our budget and how do we best utilize their input into adjustments that we're able to make. So compared to a $1.4 billion budget, a change of $500,000 here and there may not percentage-wise look big, but when you take it down to a $350 million general fund of $500,000 to $1 million change is very different. So we're figuring it out.
Definitely. Thank you very much. Next slide, please. So into the April timeline, that's where we are starting to do a lot of finalizing of the budget. So development of the CAO's proposed budget is taking up the entire month of April. And the April 20th is where we bring another financial update to your board that we're getting kind of close to the end of the year, and we should have a much better picture of where the year is going to end. And then April 28th, that's where we are targeting to have our proposed budget summary available to the Budget Committee. April 30th is when we publish the budget hearing notice, and then May 12th and 13th are the 2 days that we have tentatively scheduled for North Bethany. May 12th is the North Bethany County Service District for Road, ESPD, and URMD Budget Committee meeting. And then May 13th is the Washington County and the Service District for Lighting Budget Committee meetings. And May 25th is where we scheduled for the public hearing for the Budget Committee to conduct public hearing and engage with the public on their comments and testimonies. And June 15th is the one we tentatively scheduled for the last financial update before the year ends, and then also the budget adoption, fee schedule adoption, pay plan adoption for the fiscal year 21-22. Now, last year that we were in the process of planning a budget committee orientation, but due to the pandemic that we just wasn't able to work out the logistic. This year is not in the schedule yet, but it hasn't been lost on our radar when it comes to spring. If logistically we're allowed to, have some type of gathering or virtual event, we're still planning to have that into our work plan. It's just that we don't have a date yet, so we don't have it on the calendar for now. All right, and that's the end of this part. Any questions?
I think prospectively, I think that's the word I want to use. If we go back to that calendar slide real quick.
Yes.
I think another thing that we'll want to sort through is how to better explain to our community how we've incorporated their feedback into our thinking as we deliberate on the budget through the middle of June. Yep.
Yep, and that is all I have prepared for today. I would like to answer any of your questions before I finish this section.
Thank you. You did a great job, as always, so thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Cheese.
Anything else? Whoops. Anything else, commissioners, on this topic, on the budget update?
Thank you for a great presentation.
Thank you, Commissioner Scotton.
I know for me that I dove back into the budget to try and remind myself of some different items, and it was relatively easy on my large monitor in my office, but I knew I would be navigating similar information through the course of our discussion, so I ended up having to print pages so that I had them readily available to remind myself so that I could continue to absorb the impacts and changes as you described. So I'll be carrying that learning forward as we go through these discussions throughout the remainder of the next year. So
Thank you, Chair Harrington.
it's a big budget that you and the team manage, so thank you. All righty, so now we have a 15-minute break programmed. So everybody on board with that? Great, so we'll take a break and reconvene at 10:45. Thank you.
Hi, Dan. How are you?
I think you should buy us a cup of coffee.
Don't underestimate me. He owes me.
That's right, leverage, leverage, leverage. Never get, let it get past you.
I'll stand over here so you can eat.
Hey Steve, this is Stacy Shetler. Can you hear me?
Yes, Stacy.
Yeah, you're unmuted right now, just FYI.
Okay.
So I heard maybe a yawn or something, and your mic's working really well.
fingers all.
Virginia might just bring it up. But the good news is it's a remote meeting. No, I don't. Not that I know of. Well, Melissa probably. Yeah. Yeah, and she's been attending all the meetings, the committee meetings. She's been at all of them. Yeah.
Okay, welcome back, everyone. We'll pick up with our next agenda item, program expansion of the Neighborhood Streets Program and related amendments to the Urban Road Maintenance District Ordinance. I think that's the longest title we've ever had on a work session agenda.
Yes.
So welcome, Stephen.
We're in the book of records. Great. Thank you. I'm Stephen Roberts, Director of Land Use and Transportation. And this is really a bit of a refresher from a briefing. Step back with me all the way back to February before COVID had really hit. And
Did that time really exist?
I know, it seems like a distant memory. But we briefed you on this concept of expanding our neighborhood streets program, our traffic calming program, to include roads that we were referring to as residential collectors. So streets that look very much like a typical residential street, but in our transportation system plan are designated as collectors, meant to have higher traffic volumes and serve a sort of different function than a typical residential street. At that time, you all felt generally supportive of the concept for the expansion, but you did pose a couple of questions, and we'll just walk you through the responses to those. And really, I think our purpose today is just to confirm the board's support for moving forward with the expansion of the Neighborhood Streets Program to residential collectors and answer any questions that you may have. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Melissa Norman, who's our Neighborhood Streets Program Coordinator, and she'll walk us through the first part of our presentation.
Good morning. I want to make sure everybody can hear me.
Yes.
Okay, good. So yes, I know it's been a while since we've been here, and I'm so glad we have the longest title. You know, that's quite an award right there. So let's go ahead and get started on this. So if you remember back to February, we talked about Neighborhood Streets Program changes, those residential collectors, some project prioritization, you know, doing some just updates to the program to more reflect the current times. So moving some of the residential traffic calming stuff into more of a streamlined purchase program. And then we contacted Tualatin Valley Fire and Rescue to do some updates based on their requests and things that have changed in the last 20 years. So next slide. Thank you. So residential collector eligibility, what are we really looking at here? These are those residential fronting properties that are, you know, at least 500 feet in length. So we're talking a little, you know, a good chunk of road here that seems residential, 35 mile an hour or less. So you should be driving slower. You expect to see kids, bicycles, dogs, people walking. Your 85th percentile speed. So this is in response to something we talked about back in February. The current Neighborhood Streets Program is written for a 7 mile an hour minimum, which means that on a 25 mile an hour street, you're not even eligible for the program unless you're doing 32. And as we've seen in the past, that eliminates a lot of streets, but it still feels like you're driving fast. So we looked at lowering it to 5 mile an hour. So everything I've updated today is based on that 5 mile an hour over limit. So for 25 miles an hour, if we've got an 85th of 30, that's where we're looking at being eligible to do some traffic calming. And then to really try to get that residential collector feeling, what we're looking for is 3 of the following. So on-street parking, no center turn lanes, no bike lanes, and then 50 fronting properties per mile. So we evaluated a lot of those, well, every collector in Washington County, and really tried to figure out where the complaints have been coming in the past for the NSP, and where they used to be maybe a local or neighborhood route, they got reclassed as a collector, or really the streets that feel like they should be more of a residential street. And these are the things we came up with. I mean, if you think of where you live, these are the characteristics of your local or neighborhood route. And so that's what we're trying to get when we were trying to figure out what a residential collector is. Next slide, please. So for example, Joss in North Bethany, Johnson Street in Aloha, or Jameson Road in Raleigh Hills. These streets may look familiar to some of you. You've probably had some conversations about a few of them. These are the ones that we are looking at under the expanded revised program. Under these updates, these would now be covered and eligible for Neighborhood Streets Program traffic calming. Next slide, please. So what does that mean when they're eligible? Well, now we have to do a prioritization to see which streets actually qualify and then in what order we'll be able to get to them. So first off, greatest number of criteria met. These are the same criteria for what makes them eligible. Now we're saying that, you know, how many of those eligibility boxes did they tick? If they tick the most of them, it sounds really weird, but I guess that makes them more residential collectors. And then the second thing we're looking at is that speed differential. So the ones where we have a higher traffic speeding issue, those are the ones we want to tackle first. And then if we happen to have a tie between, you know, let's say we've got 2 streets come in that both have, they meet 4 criteria. They've both got 7 mile and over speed differential between 85th and posted. Then we're looking at traffic volume. Let's go ahead and rank the ones higher that have more traffic on them. See if we can, you know, that'll have a greater impact.
And Melissa, I think you meant to say 5 miles per hour over.
Sorry, yes, yeah. 5 mile an hour minimum over. So next slide, please. So that's the same thing. We've rewritten the program and updated it for locals and neighborhood routes. So they're looking at the same sort of criteria. It's the existing criteria that we're using. We've kind of updated, rewritten it, and made it match.
And Melissa,
So
the chair has a question.
I had a question on the prior slide.
Yes.
So the idea here is traffic calming to deal with speeding traffic. Why do we care if there are sidewalks or bike lanes in existence?
I'll take this one to start with. I think it just sort of gets at this notion of prioritizing. So on streets that have sidewalks and or bike facilities, there's a safe off-street place for people to walk. And for neighborhoods that don't have them, people tend to walk in the roadway itself. And so the thinking there was perhaps to give a higher priority to the neighborhoods that perhaps don't have a place to walk outside the roadway. In other words, if we were trying to prioritize one over another, using that as a criteria.
So it's what you're talking about is walking in parallel as opposed to crossing. Okay.
Yes, correct. That's right.
We're also looking at some of so collectors are meant to be more of a commuter route, connecting the local streets to the arterials. But if it's more of a residential collector, it's more of like the neighborhood traffic, not necessarily the commuter traffic. And so on those ones, you typically don't see the striping. You're not going to see the bike lanes. They may or may not have sidewalks. You know, there might be gaps in the sidewalk or they might be missing. So those are the more residential ones. The collectors that are less residential and more commuter routes, those are the ones that have the striping and the bike lanes and things like that. So those aren't necessarily the ones we're trying to target for traffic calming. They're less residential and more commuter route.
Yep, I'm following you now. Thank you.
Okay. So locals and neighborhood routes. Same sort of thing here. We've got residential density, missing or incomplete sidewalks, schools or parks, residential, commercial, transit, institutional. So these are all things that are under the existing program. These are all that help rank the current neighborhood streets program locals, because these are all pedestrian generators. So we've updated them, but there's the same thing in the new program. The second ranking would then be the differential between the 85th and the posted speed. So anything that hits at least 5 miles an hour over the posted when we go out and do data collection would then be eligible. And then again, when they're tied, it would go to the highest traffic volume. So next slide, please. So all the way back in February, when we looked at the current 7 mile an hour threshold versus the 5 mile an hour threshold that we were talking about, what does this actually mean for an impact to the program? Well, it was a little easier to look at for the residential collectors because that's brand new. We're starting from scratch there. So if you change it from a 7 mile an hour threshold to a 5, you're looking at adding 4 streets, 4 additional ones that that would be eligible under the 5 mile an hour threshold. It's a little bit harder to say what it would do to the locals and the neighborhood routes because not all of those come in for traffic calming. We don't have data on a lot of them. But based on the historic requests of what I've seen in the data we've been collecting over the past few years, we get about 7 that qualify now. We'd get about 27 that would qualify. So there's about 20 additional streets that fall in that 5 to 7 mile an hour range that we're expanding that would now be eligible. But the thing to remember with this is these are ones that are now eligible, but there's a whole process that goes along with this. For example, we currently get anywhere from 50 to 100 requests a year. But I can tell you I don't do 50 to 100 projects a year. I do maybe 10% of that. They take multiple years to get through. There's a community involvement process. Some communities, it's one person that calls us that wants the traffic calming, and every other household on that street disagrees and they don't want it. So it looks like a big number to go from 7 to 27, but it's just the eligible ones. It's not the ones that are actually going to make it through the program. It may take them years to make it through the program. So that's something to remember. It is going to make an increased demand. So it is going to make that prioritization more important. And there are going to be project delays and limitations due to staff and funding. I'm one person. I have one person that helps me out, and I've got some great office staff that help with a lot of the administrative parts to it, but we can't keep up with the demand for this program, especially if we're looking at expanding it. I think this is a great thing to do. We're going to be able to really help a lot of the neighborhoods that continually ask for traffic calming, and I've had to tell them, over the years, you're just not eligible, you're just not eligible. But this is going to see the same thing that we saw when, and I say we, but I wasn't here when the program started, that many of you may remember from when the program started. There was a lot of projects in the beginning, and then they started tapering off. And I think we're going to see the same thing here, but we'll have a path forward. We can tell them that, yes, we can do something. Let's start the process. It may take us a couple years to get to you and to complete a project, but we can get something started.
Yeah.
So any questions?
Yeah, so would they rather hear they don't qualify or you're 2 years in the queue?
Well, right now I've been telling a few residents up on some of these streets that would qualify under the expanded program that we're working on the expansion. I've been telling them this for about a year now. And let me tell you, they do call me about every 3 months wondering what's happening. So I've been to a few meetings in the Cedar Hills, Cedar Mill area. I've been up to some in North Bethany. These residents are still wanting to know what's happening. There were some of them that wanted to know when we were coming to the board. So if we are moving forward this, they will probably be getting a follow-up email from the Neighborhood Streets program telling them, hey, look, we're going to the board for approval at this date if we have something to go forward with. But I do have probably a half dozen neighborhoods that are very, that follow up with me periodically to see what's happening with this. And if they're following anything that's happening with the board, once this is approved, I will probably be getting an email from them requesting that we start the process in their neighborhood.
So if I heard you correctly, you do about 10 a year, or do you do less than that?
So I get 50 to 100 requests that come in. 6 to 10 of those turn into neighborhood meetings, but 3 to 5 of them are projects. So I may go to the neighborhood meeting and it may take a couple years for us to get to the actual project phase. I may go to the neighborhood meeting, tell them that they need to do a petition because that is one of the steps, and the petition fizzles. I had one project we finally completed last year that I think Mike told me he started like 5 years ago. It took him that long to get enough support in the neighborhood. I've had projects that have kicked through the petition and been ready to do the project within 2 months. So it really does depend on neighborhood involvement, and that's what we want. This is not Washington County coming in and telling them, you have a problem, let us fix it. It's the neighborhood coming in and saying, we have a problem, and then the county going out investigating and saying, yeah, we could probably help you with this. What would you like us to do? And working together. So this is a really collaborative process.
That's really good. I like to hear that, and I like the involvement of the neighborhoods as well, so that they are actually leading the charge. I was just wanting to also make sure I understood your time capacity to, I guess, process these projects through as they meet their criteria. How long does it take for us to meet our criteria and move ahead on that? So I was just wondering about your capacity.
Yeah, and I think the answer is it'll vary, obviously, depending on the circumstances at any given time. But I think this is what Melissa's getting at, is this is going to probably fill up the pipeline. And as it says in the slide, I think that just makes the prioritization process important. I think to your initial question, my sense is people will be pleased to hear that the criteria is changing and that some roads that may not have met the eligibility criteria will, even though that may mean they're still a few years out from being able to get there. I think seeing that there's a possibility now where there wasn't before will be hopeful.
Well, the underlying program is, it's all about safety. But I think one thing that our discussion is highlighting today is that if there is a staff report that comes to us in the future, it would be helpful if we have a block diagram, a flow diagram. Because the point about the neighborhood agreement is really, really pivotal.
Yes.
Commissioner Scouten, did you?
Yeah, thank you. Just a comment. We'll see how things go in the future. I have to say that I appreciated you listed Johnson Street in Aloha as an example of maybe a worthwhile project. I have bicycled that many times in the past when I felt a little more ambitious and wanted to commute from here back to my home in Beaverton. I think that, like those folks who are trying to find a place to walk, those who are trying to find a place to bike, and if you could see the traffic slow a little bit its speed, that would be, I think, a very positive thing. And this is a street that actually runs a long ways and has to be, from east to west, it starts really at 175th, and actually there's a connection with Johnson Street on a quiet residential street that takes you over to Alexander, takes you all the way to 170th, actually, to the east. And going west, which kind of leads to my question, going west, there's actually a very direct connection, a slight jog going onto Drake Street in Hillsborough. Just wondering if we do projects like a Johnson Street, what's the interplay possible with neighboring jurisdictions? And do you have any thoughts about how we might coordinate with a Beaverton or a Hillsborough or other public jurisdiction that has a street that runs beyond that? Because really, in a way, Johnson Street will take a commuter that wants to be parallel to TV Highway all the way from Brookwood all the way to 170th. But part of that's in Hillsborough. So any thoughts about how we might coordinate with neighboring jurisdictions?
Yeah, that's a great observation. And Melissa, I don't know if you have any experience in terms of how we have worked with other jurisdictions, but I think if nothing else, that's a great point that I think we can take back and think about how we might do more coordination with our neighboring agencies.
We haven't worked with them yet on a project, but I will say that I've talked to City of Hillsborough specifically as they implement more traffic calming. They wanted to know what we were doing, what devices we use, what our procedures and standards were. So we've done some coordination with City of Hillsborough. And I know we abut other projects down on like Locust Street and stuff where residents are noticing when the city has one standard and the county has another. And so we've got the connections made and the faces and names connected between cities and counties. And if our project does abut a city, connects to it, runs through it, the coordination will be made with them, because I do think it is beneficial to say that, we could do a whole corridor, we could evaluate the whole corridor rather than just putting a Washington County project right in the middle of something. Whether we're able to do anything with the city is a whole nother story. But yes, they absolutely would be coming to the table with those discussions. That's part of that collaboration.
Just a question of clarity. When you said their criteria is different from ours, is that the 7 mile per hour to 5 mile per hour? Is that the only difference between the qualifications?
Actually, it has nothing to do with that. The loudest complaint I have gotten is the standard for speed bumps versus speed cushions. And so that has to do with driving over adjacent speed bumps for one of the cities. The resident felt that they were more abrupt and therefore stopped traffic more efficiently, slowed them down a lot more than our speed cushions that we put in on our section of the roadway. And so he was calling and asking, why couldn't we do what the city did? I think he felt that their traffic calming was a lot more effective. And so it wasn't even related to, the program and the criteria. It was actually related to the device installed in the field.
Okay, thank you. I didn't think the City of Hillsborough liked speed bumps. I thought their fire department was opposed to them because of the potential damage on their fire trucks.
So, and if you'll see our speed cushions that we put in, they have the grooves for the fire trucks. They're wide enough that the fire trucks can go through them without slowing down. But we've actually found that speed cushions may not be the most effective method for traffic calming. Our sheriff's office has really interesting opinions on that. So that is it's probably the number one request that I get. But in having the neighborhood meetings, it's also one of the fastest ones to get voted down. When the residents all come together and talk, one person says, I want speed bumps, and everybody else gets involved, and then it doesn't end up going very far. So that's one of those where if we could participate in the conversation with them and give them some more ideas of traffic calming, that we might suggest they can have a real conversation and maybe decide on something that everybody can agree on.
Okay.
Yeah, and I think one thing Melissa may be referring to are speed feedback signs. They give real-time speed data, and those prove to be pretty effective at modifying folks' behavior. They actually see, like, oh gosh, I didn't realize I was going that fast, and they slow down. And
especially when it flashes red.
Right. You speak from experience.
No, I've never heard about it.
There we go.
Yep, that's very effective. Yep.
Are you wanting comments at this point? Are you more
Yeah,
presentation?
no, we're certainly open for comments, yeah.
Well, without, revisiting too much of the history, because I was here when we did that. I mean, we shied away from all of this because we felt it was a municipal service, and that was not what we were doing. So I would hope that your committee, the Urban Road Maintenance District, would talk about that so that at least that issue can be addressed. Is it a municipal service? But moving beyond that, again, the reason for the Urban Road Maintenance Districts is there would have been a hodgepodge of a bazillion LIDs. And we said, well, how do we do this so that it is not an LID of about every other block? I mean, those are costly, unmanageable. They're not big enough to do some things and cut through traffic. But having said that, how do you go back to certain areas who may not get any funding because we're now prioritizing potentially 20 more projects a year and say, it's okay if you and, I'll just pick an area, you and Tiger are paying for something in Cedar Hills or Cedar Mills. It's okay because it's all part of a system. And they're saying, but I'm not getting anything. So maybe I need to get out of this urban maintenance district somehow and have many ones that are district-wide. So I've always been a big supporter of roads throughout the county. I think we all are interconnected. But there is a financial discussion there that if you're shifting limited resources, some people are not going to be very happy about it. They will for a bit until they catch on, and they're going to say that doesn't meet our needs. So two issues I hope that the Urban Maintenance District folks would discuss is this a municipal service? Are we getting into that, and what does that mean? As Commissioner Scouten was kind of alluding to, what does that mean to other cities, for instance, Beaverton and Hillsborough as an example. And second, what sort of a dollar shift is going on so that we may not be able to do the more normal maintenance activities that we are doing in some areas because we've now allocated them to not maintenance of the road, but safety issues, which are either speed bumps, cushioning, bump outs, whatever you're going to do. So that's my comment.
Yeah, and it's a great point. At this point, we're not anticipating the need to increase the budget allocation for the Neighborhood Streets program. We're going to start out and see how we do within our current budget allocation. I think in future years, if we found that the demand significantly exceeds the capacity, that could be a conversation for future budget discussion. And we'll learn as we go. But, right.
I'm going to jump in. This is Steve Franks. Melissa has reviewed the proposed change to the Neighborhood Streets program. I'm a senior program coordinator on operations and maintenance. And I'm going to discuss the proposed change to ERMD ordinance number 4. And the current ERMD ordinance is ERMD ordinance number 3. It was adopted by the board in 2011. That was to authorize the ERMD pedestrian and biking improvements, which back then were called safety improvements. So ERMD ordinance number 4 is really very straightforward. It's essentially about expanding the Neighborhood Streets program, the eligibility of it to include residential collectors, as Melissa has described. And that way, ERMD funding is available for traffic calming on residential collectors. So that's really the focus of ERMD ordinance number 4, to expand Neighborhood Streets program eligibility. At the same time, we have done some very minor text cleanup in the ERMD ordinance language, primarily for vocabulary consistency. And that's a real fast snapshot about what the ERMD ordinance number 4 is all about. So if you have any questions, I'll be glad to answer them. Otherwise, Melissa could talk more about the process, both looking backwards as well as forwards.
Okay, I don't see any questions.
Okay, so if you go to the next slide. So where were we? This did go to ERMDAC, the ERMD Advisory Committee. We were at the work session. We're here doing the follow-up to the work session. And then over the upcoming month, we're going to be going through the process to do the ERMD ordinance update. And so then on November 17th, we'd like you to consider the ERMD ordinance number 4 and an NSP R&O to get this update completed. the NSP R&O would be everything we've just talked about. The update to the program and expansion, and the earned ordinance would be the funding portion of that, which is the same budget we've been dealing with. So we're still within that $200,000 annual budget. We're just opening it up for some additional streets, which I don't anticipate being a problem because we have not spent the full budget in the last few years. So staff time permitting, we'll be able to hopefully utilize some more of that budget and respond to some of these requests that have come in on residential collectors or locals and neighborhood routes that are at 5 mile an hour instead of 7 mile an hour over the posted speed. So I believe the next slide is the last slide. Any questions?
Commissioners, any last questions? Nope.
Okay, great. And I'll say, besides November 17th, you'll see a few consent agenda items and a first reading of the earned ordinance coming before you ahead of November 17th, but that's the date that we're going to be asking you to act on both adoption of the ordinance and the resolution in order for the neighborhood street program policy update.
Which of them, if any, will have a staff report?
I think we'll have,
Presentation staff report.
yeah, I think the 17th would be the primary place where we'll want to walk through a staff report.
Okay. So if we get any public input, it would probably be in that meeting?
Yeah, that's entirely possible. And we'll have a first reading of the ordinance on, is it November 3rd, I believe? Does that sound right, Melissa or Steve? I believe that's correct.
Okay.
Yeah.
Terrific.
All right. Thank
Great.
you all.
Thank you. All righty, next item on the agenda is the briefing on the community investment conversation.
Kevin, I just want to make sure that Marcus Mundy is available. We don't need him at the moment, but he will be presenting a slide or two. Great, thanks. Good morning. Elizabeth Mazzara-Myers, Chief of Staff to Chair Harrington, here today to talk with you about the community investment conversation. Next slide. So we're here today to provide you an update on the community investment conversation. We'll provide the board context for the longer-term conversation around county budgeting process and community needs being led by the CAO. And we'll confirm board agreement on goals and outcomes for the community investment conversation. Next slide. So this timeline was developed with a direction from County Administrator Angie. I have 3 explanatory slides that follow. These will provide goals and outcomes for each of these bubbles. Ms. Angie is prepared to answer any questions should the board require additional information. Next slide. So as you know, Q4 2020, we are launching what we're now calling community investment conversations, though it is the second year the board has engaged with the public on a budget listening effort. The 3 goals are to provide public education on the county budget and the budgeting process, to provide opportunity for community visibility into and comment on agency priorities, and to take another step forward in an effort to center community need in the development of short-term and long-term budgeting planning. The outcome goal here is to provide yet another data point for the board in providing thematic level direction to staff regarding FY 21-22 budget. And I want to just stay there for a minute. I know there's ongoing concerns with the board that community members will come with a list of requests or demands and then expect the board to react immediately. The outcome for this is not intended to be a laundry list opportunity for the community, but rather an education opportunity, a chance to share priorities with the board, and a chance to look long-term about how the board's investing community dollars. I'll say the first part, pardon me, I should have said this. The first part of this presentation will provide updates on this bubble chart, and then we'll talk about the program. And I'm hoping that by the time we get through the program, you'll see that we've worked pretty closely with the facilitator, with Administrator Angie and CFO Liang to ensure that we've got a program that will provide this outcome. So, yeah.
So you talked about pausing there.
Yeah, sure.
I really appreciate the flow that you've used to illustrate this so that we have this in mind because we can see it. We have continuous reinforcement of what a public sector, local government budget process is like. But our community doesn't. So I really appreciate that for all of these public meetings that we have, that you've illustrated it right there for us. And I really appreciate these goals because it is clear about how we're trying to ensure that we're hearing from the community and that we're able to incorporate input into our own thinking. So job well done on this.
Well, first I want to thank PowerPoint for Smart Art, which is my new favorite thing in the world. So that, we'll give PowerPoint that. But I will say one of the things that the chair pointed out, that Ms. Angie emphasized today, and I think Mr. Lang did as well, that the report that comes back to the board in response to the community investment conversations is not the last time the board will have an opportunity to give direction to staff. It's just another data point, right? And so until the budget is adopted, the board, you have the opportunity to give whatever input you feel is appropriate. This is just one more place where you're going to have some information. So as much as I can emphasize that, I think that's important to understand.
Hey, excuse me, just one minute. I just want to make a comment here that this is critical to get community input. Make sure that you understand that that's my belief. I think that it's also critical to make sure that we are educating, as you mentioned, the community about what their role is in this process. We are at a point where we're hearing defund the police, fund mental health, and the messages are truly pointed right at our budget process. So this is going to be a confusing time, and it's an opportunity to not educate the community about what their role is in this process. And I really want to make sure that we do this well, that we have a good facilitator, that we step through this process in a way that the community feels heard, we get the information that we need, and there aren't expectations built in the community that we can't step through. So, and I know I'm preaching to the choir here, but I really want to say it again, that I think it's so critical. And, I really don't want to set ourselves up for a situation where we have the potential to have the conversation be hijacked. And that's critical for our budget process and to make sure that we come through this in the best manner possible.
Well, my hope is, Commissioner Treese, that by the end of this presentation, you'll feel reassured that we've thought through this program pretty thoroughly, and if there's any concerns, we can always make adjustments. I think that the primary challenge I see with this is that it's online and not in person. I think when we have an online budget conversation, there's a lot of opportunities for engagement that are more natural than it is online. But I think we've tried to address that as best we can, and I think you'll see this will reflect as much as possible what you did in person last year at the budget listening session.
Okay, and I'm just registering what I believe is
Absolutely.
on everybody's mind here.
Thank you. Next slide. So as we move into Q1 and Q2 of next year, the board will have a conversation with the CAO to discuss your priorities and initiatives relative to the budget, as well as a larger conversation about the county budgeting process. The outcome will be to develop direction for County Administrator Angie regarding investments in board priorities and initiatives, as well as direction regarding the budgeting process. And again, this will be directed by the County Administrator. I'm still involved, not simply as a project manager, as we move this over to her office. Next slide. Once you've given direction, the next part is moving into the end of 2021 when the CAO, CFO, and CEIO will assess the agency budgeting process, including the role of the community. I would expect that there will be some public-facing pieces of this, and my hope is that moving into 2021, we'll be able to have that information to the public about when and how they can start talking about or give input into what the process should look like. The outcome will be a budgetary process proposal to support community needs-focused budgeting. And I want to just take a moment to say this. I'm not saying here that the outcome is participatory budgeting. We're saying that this is to support community needs-focused budgeting. So I just want to make that clear distinction about the outcome intent.
And I just need this clarification for myself here. Where does, how does our currently, our budget committees that are in position, how are they involved in this process or not?
I will leave that to County Administrator Angie to answer.
Yes, and I'm looking to Jack too, because I'm just learning Washington County process. But as we look at what the budget process is in the future, so lessons learned through these community investment conversations, working with the CFO and the CEIO, we will be getting input from the budget committees as well. So Jack, is there anything else you wanted to?
The reason I bring that up is that we do have a system where we have, a process where we get input from the budget committees, but it isn't a complete community engagement.
And that's where the inputs will need to come multi-prong from the board, from the community, and then also the budget committees. Jack, did you want to share any additional comments?
Thank you, Commissioner Trees. Your point is well taken. We always keep in close communication with budget committees on any of this type of activities, and I actually personally encourage and invite them to participate in any of the county's budget processes. And just based on ORS, the statutory design for a budget committee is actually, rather than bringing community input, but actually acts as part of the county's committee to receive community input and participate on the county's budget development and approval process. So just simply by the role of budget committee is not necessarily an input brought forward role, but with that said, there are definitely important parts of the community that feels very strongly about the county's financial management. So they're always informed and involved as a budget committee member.
Great, thank you.
And the and beyond, there's not a slide for that because I don't know what that looks like. So that's for you all and the CAO, CFO, and CEIO to decide. So and beyond. Next slide. So I want to take a moment here to switch gears from that longer term context to the actual program itself. You'll note that 2 of those dates have been highlighted in green. We also have November 16th. So November 12th, Commissioner Scouten is going to be the primary district commissioner. November 16th, Commissioner Rogers will be the primary district commissioner, and November 21st, it will be Commissioner Willie. To Commissioner Treese and Chair Harrington, if none of these dates work well with your calendars, we can certainly push this back. So please don't be limited by the dates that I've provided here. I also want to repeat, of course, you can come to any or all of these, but the goal is to have 5 events where each commissioner will have an opportunity to be the primary person speaking, since we can't do it in your districts. Commissioner Willie.
Yeah, I think I'm the 12th. Not Commissioner Scouten, because that was the only time I could do it. And then, Dick, you only had 1 date in there as well, if I remember.
Good, thank you for that update. So Scouten, wait, Willie, Commissioner Willie, you're the 12th.
I'm the 12th.
Scouten is the,
Scouten is
thank you for correcting. And you're the 16th.
No, Roy was doing something. That's a good idea, Dick.
I agree, and that was part of my thinking process as well. Thank you. Next slide, please. And, and Chair Harrington and Commissioner Treese, I'll follow up with you, obviously, to ensure we find dates for you.
I've already given my input.
Thank you.
And I support your input, by the way, about the 2 Saturdays. And so, and I'm pretty flexible as far as the other dates. And I intend to attend as many as possible.
Great.
So
thank you. So the next few slides will provide an early draft of the run of show, the rules of the road for the program, which I refer to as the program engagement plan, as well as a preview of CFO Liang's Budget 101, and a look at 2 exercises that'll be presented by the consultants. 2 exercises, one of which will be presented by the consultants and will be the basis of the board and public conversation. As I noted, this program is intended to be as much like that in-person budget listening tour we did last year. I want to give you some insight into the direction we're taking the program and to get input on whether our planning meets your needs. Okay. Next slide. So for draft run of show, this is going to look really familiar. The public will join. There'll be an introduction by the facilitator, the community welcome, and excuse me, I should have updated that. Well, no, that's correct. It'll be a community welcome from the chair, pardon me, and then the district commissioner or the chair will provide a couple of minutes about priorities, Budget 101, followed by Q&A by CFO Liang, rules of the road, and intro to the exercise by the facilitator, the exercise, discussion, wrap up, and goodbye. And at this point, Kevin, pardon me, can we make sure Marcus is a panelist or presenter?
He is.
Great,
Marcus,
thank
can you hear us?
Yes, I can hear you.
Excellent, great, thank you.
So a couple points on this run of show.
Yes.
That it's audio and visual only, no chat.
And you will see on that, when we get to the next slide, you'll see me addressing what I'm calling the program engagement.
Oh, thank you.
So why don't we just jump into the next slide?
Thank you.
Yeah, sure. And this, I think this was reflected in the most recent update of the packet. So I'll just read through these quickly. Facilitator will lead the program per the finalized run of show. Comments will be disabled, which is the chat box, though we'll be encouraging the public to submit comments in advance of the program and at its completion via email. During the discussion portions of the program, the facilitator will identify the members of the public with questions or comments and provide them time to speak by 2 or 3 minutes. For 2 or 3 minutes, I'll be working with Kevin and the consultant team to figure out how we do that. It'll likely be some sort of hand raise, which you all have seen. In response to whatever the public says, board will have a chance to comment, respond, or pivot the question to the CFO. So it'll be a back and forth conversation. Again, as close as we can get to being in real life, but being online, we have to be a little more regulated. The facilitator will work with the consultant team to ensure the program goals are stated at the beginning and are available throughout the program to help keep the conversation focused and productive. And I just want to refer you, the program goals I'm referring to are those highlighted in the first bubble on page 4. And then they'll be hosted by the county, so the technical pieces will be handled by County Clerk Moss. He'll work to ensure a smooth program, and we'll be doing a tech run-through. As we get closer, I'll let you know when the tech run-through is. So if you all want to, if anybody you want to join and sort of get a feel for what it's going to look like, you'll have a chance in advance to see that. So let me pause there. That was a lot of new information. Does the board have any questions? Yes,
Oh,
Chair.
I'll just comment. I think this is a really good step forward. We took a few too many risks in the logistics for the August listening session. And I went back and looked at the Clackamas County various listening sessions and town halls. So this is put together leveraging best-known practices for having productive public engagement sessions through these internet-based applications.
And I will say this is a mix between what we did in the town hall in the spring and what we did in listening sessions. If you recall, the town hall, questions were submitted online and staff actually read the questions for the public, and then the chair responded. In the listening session, it was all the public. Here, hopefully, we're going to strike that balance and meet the needs of this particular program. Any questions, concerns? Great, and so at this point, next slide, and I want to just give you an explanation of this slide. I wanted to help you sort of walk through the program. So on the left-hand, excuse me, on the right-hand side of the slide, you'll see where we are in the run of show and what information is being provided. I want to highlight, I did not put the word draft on here. This is a draft of CFO Lang's Budget 101. So you may see changes as we get closer to the actual program.
Thank you, Chair Harrington, Commissioners, and I just want to provide you an overview of what we will provide as part of the budget overview as this community investment conversations. It's very similar to what we presented last year as a budget listening tour, and the goal of this part is to continue to communicate with the community on the county's budget process, as well as all the thought processes and the priorities that goes into the county's budget. To start off, we have the budget basics, is to communicate with the community reiteration of the county's mission, what guides our budget process. That includes the ORS, the community input, your board's directions and priorities, and all of that. And then also we go into a little bit more basic information about what's our functional area, what's our fund, how does our budget structure works. And then next, we will go into the budget process, which where we communicate to the community about our July to June budget calendar overview, and that includes highlights of where the public can engage with our budget process within that whole process, and where do they get informed of our budget process. Next slide, please. And then going into a little bit deeper into our fiscal year 2021 budget, as informative session, we start out with the major initiatives that was communicated in our budget document, so we'll highlight that. And then going into the total appropriation and breakdowns among all of our 5 operating functional areas: general government, public safety and justice, LUT, HHH, HS, and cultural education and recreation. And then we'll look at our revenue streams by categories. This will give the public information on how much do we actually get in taxes, how much are in the grants programs, and all of those different revenue stream categories, as well as expenditure categories, as what do we spend on personnel services, material and services, capital projects, spending and debt services. And then last but not least, we will include general fund appropriation and breakdown, which help us focus into on what the county's discretionary resources and what are those discretionary programs that the county actually operates. So that's just at a high level what I'm planning to build in the content of this year's budget overview for the community.
So on this, I spent a bunch of time with the new chart tools that you have, and I only have the one screen, and you have to select certain things. So that's where I ended up sending you that chart that had my own drawings on it, because I couldn't quite get to the essence of enough summary through just one selection. So it may be there, but I'm still new to the tool. So I just want to say I'm happy to sign myself up as a guinea pig, because I only stand to learn that much more, so that you've got someone who's really trying to learn the ins and outs of these different categories and what is discretionary and how all the dials that you know so well work together.
Yep.
In a way that will help us navigate through potential conversations.
That's good. We'll keep you informed with any further development on that tool. And last year, obviously, we went from 0 to 1, from not having a tool to having a tool. We definitely continue to work on improving that as well.
And I will note that we've given Jack exactly 30 minutes to do this. So 10 minutes presentation and 20 minutes questions. So this really will be a very high-level presentation in an effort to provide as much time as possible for conversation. Again, this is all draft, and if we're feeling like that is not enough time, we will continue to improve this as we move ahead. And the best run of show is the one you finalize right before the program. So I'm sure we'll be seeing adjustments and updates.
I think if I could express a little concern about that, in that we deal with budget issues on a regular basis and still need more time to process. You're tossing out a $1.4 billion budget in 10 minutes, trying to emphasize, of course, as this says, the general government and public safety and justice. I think there's just a lot of meat there, and I don't think if our purpose is for this is a community investment conversation, I'd be a little concerned that we're just clipping the tops of the trees, and I'm not sure. Maybe we should focus on what's the critical top 2 items, and we don't go any deeper than that. And to me, there's plenty of meat out there on this, and so if they walked away with one thought that they understood it better, what would that be? And that's where we focus. I'm concerned about the 10 minutes. I mean, you're giving them 10 minutes again, high level, 30,000 feet, and you're expecting 20 minutes of questions. That would imply that they're going to do their homework before they come, because they're probably not going to get enough substance in that 10 minutes to really be able to ask questions. So again, I'll push back a little bit about that. I'd rather see a 15-15, but I really would like to see if they walk away with one item, we want them to learn one thing, what's the most important thing that they learn?
And to that point, I think we'll take a look back at last year's program. It felt like in person that the time, whatever time we gave you last year seemed to work. So I may just need to go back and look at last year's run of show and see that we're sort of matching that up. But indeed, I think the goal is to provide that high-level look, and maybe that, there is a lot to cover, so we can consider that.
I know just looking at each of these bullet things, you're going to need to spend more time on the total appropriation. So I think we are going to have to extend the time a little bit. We may have to go out till 8 p.m. at this point. But I think you're right to list out the 5 dash areas you've got, but you're going to need to provide a similar amount of time on each of the bullet items in order for it to be fruitful, because at this rate, all you're going to be able to say is general government has this for general fund and this for special fund, and that's not the meaning of it. And we know from last year that people articulated interest in understanding what diversity, equity, inclusion was all about. That's under general government. We certainly know they want to know more about public safety and justice. There was interest on land use and transportation last year. And we certainly know with the response to be more supportive of behavioral health needs and affordable housing that there's interest on that bullet as well. So I don't think we have the luxury of just one thing to present on. And this really is a journey of learning, and this is just the 2021 step.
And I think the idea of possibly pushing this out to an 8 o'clock end time certainly provides, I think, some more room to have this larger conversation, and certainly we'll bring it back to the work group and see what folks feel.
And I know it's going to be interesting because Jack made it fun last year for us to learn about 77 special funds. So I have no doubt that people will be engaged and interested. But on the Budget 101, and then on the exercises as well. Aaron's exercise with the dots last year was brilliant. So I know it's not going to be just sitting there for an hour and a half. It's really going to be fun and interesting.
Well, I'm sure Jack says there's nothing more fun than public budgeting.
That is definitely my biased opinion.
So to that aspect of public budgeting, is there benefit to having a Bill Nye Science Guy type of YouTube presentation on what the structure of the budget is that is done ahead of time, that isn't in depth about the current budget, but just more structurally based, that they could click on ahead of time? Now, I don't know how many people would do it, but it might be something that we could keep internally too for training purposes in different arenas as well. And I'm only thinking about from the structure standpoint, not from what currently makes up our budget in terms of resources. So
I think that's a great idea because it'd be something we just leave on our website.
yeah.
And we could just point to that. I mean, so you don't even have to attend one of these things if you didn't have the time or couldn't, but you could still click on and get the meat of the program. So, yeah.
And I don't know how much work that would
Well,
be.
another would be that instead of making Jack do the presentation in all 5 sessions, he could film that part of it and then be in the in-person Q&A.
And he could be a movie star on YouTube, you know.
I want to be careful with that.
And we can say we knew him when.
We're looking into the possibility of that. Envisioning, having a really high quality video that actually goes in and out. I kind of, in comparison, I'm thinking of the AOC video of that explaining what county business is all about. That actually takes a lot of work and logistics going into a high quality video like that. And I definitely, I will look into that. I don't know if we can promise that we have enough resources together to pull it off in a short couple
Well,
of
maybe
weeks.
next year.
But it will definitely be in our work plan.
And like I said, I think this is something that is a tool that could be used internally, externally, with some of our advisory committees. I could see it being part of the civic leaders presentation, those types of things.
Absolutely. Well, definitely work on that. Okay, any other questions for the budget part of
Any other bright ideas? Is that what you're looking at me for?
You need to start a Commissioner Tree's idea books.
Great, then, next slide. And I know, again, I know there's a lot of information on this, but on the right-hand side of your slide is where we are in the run of show. On the phone, or no, in person, there we are. Hi, Marcus. So online, we've got Marcus Monday, who's the consultant lead, who will be facilitating this program. And I'm going to turn over to you, Marcus, if you want to talk through the different exercises and have the chat with the board about direction.
Yeah, I will. Thank you. Thank you, Elizabeth. And thank you, commissioners, for letting me chat with you today. A couple of things before I go into the two samples where I definitely want your feedback. One, I just want to make sure, and I think the chair will already have covered it in her comments, but the value proposition at the beginning, just to ground the community and what we're trying to achieve here, but I think that'll already be done. Two, some acknowledgement that it's going to be a totally different cultural and economic environment than last year. So people that attended last year, whatever has to be reframed about the moment or the conditions we're in, I would want that to be part of the predicate. And I'm mindful of every comment. I've been taking notes while you all have been talking. So perhaps I can't allay all your concerns today about how this is going to go, but as a member of the choir, Commissioner Treese, I'm mindful what I heard from the Chief of Staff, the Chair, Commissioner Treese, Commissioner Willie. We learned from the listening sessions, and so we're trying to a bunch went right in the listening sessions, and there were a bunch of learning opportunities there. So I want to make sure that you understand that we've acknowledged that and built that in, whether it's a jacked video or a pre-survey or a pre-package. We want to get as much information out before the session. And even the ones that don't do their homework, we want to make sure that the info, the websites, the communications, any materials, and to the point that was brought up, I think, by the chair about the deeper knowledge needed, even if we expand the time and we as facilitators will exceed to whatever time you want to go, 90 minutes, 120 minutes, that's all fine. But even if we exceed to the time, we want them to be aware that there are those budget committee and other committee meetings that can influence the budget process that CFO Liang mentioned. And I want them to have all that information in as tight a package as we can before November 12th, before any session. That was recommended by a couple of people on the call that we had, but definitely by CAO Angie. So I want to make sure that that's in advance. I will continuously remind them in the process what I've already heard 2 or 3 times today. This is not a participatory budgeting process. It's an opportunity for the community to provide their input. We will be not limiting ideas or commentary, but limiting the time frame so we can have a broader array of hearing. The commissioners don't have to sit on their hands this time. They can actually respond and give feedback, as Ms. Mazzara Myers mentioned. We'll have experienced facilitators, board interactive, limits on speakers, Okay, so I just wanted that to be the foundation, and we're trying to make this as close to an in-person convening as possible, which we couldn't do with the breakout rooms. Unless the commissioners have a strong desire for breakout rooms, we've looked at this without the breakout room module, trying to keep everybody in the same room. So that said, now I will go to this slide, which is a decision that I'm looking for from the commissioners. And again, last year, I looked through some of the materials, and Aaron did have a fun dot exercise. And if that is the choice that you want, we will come up with a model that largely copies that, replicates that. We will follow the rubric set by Jack in his Budget 101 predicate, saying that here's the areas, this is how it works. When you're talking about investing or divesting, we'll have some kind of dot exercise. And one thing I have to meet with our team and figure out how to do that seamlessly using the polling function or some other function. And we'll have an example of that before your next working session. But depending on where we land, but we'll walk through that and we'll try to keep that program very tight and then come back for the discussion portion. Or if you don't want a dot exercise, but you would rather use this household budgeting exercise, and you can see in here, the goal to present the county's budget in a scale that is relatable to the average member of the public. They want to know how the revenue streams and how to spend and all that. We can provide an example of that by just, as this example says, removing the zeros from the county budget, 1.4, well, actually 1.5 now, including the COVID money. But of that, Jack will have already walked them through X amount of special funds. Here's 320 million of general fund, but of that, this is how we propose as a baseline, and then they can walk and see the areas, not that they can necessarily influence, but that they can share with the commissioners their thoughts, and then the commissioners can provide them feedback about how you make your decisions, why it's a good idea, bad idea, or some middle ground. But we will give, even in this exercise, we will give the public another opportunity to vote on how to spend the general fund and how they would do it. It's basically a different version of the dot exercise, but with very specific examples that we hope approximates how they go about doing their own household budget. I gave the example yesterday in the group, which I think they had given me before, which was simply, your mortgage, you have money in your budget for that, but that's kind of like your special fund. It's already allocated, you must spend it on that. But some of the 320 million general fund are some not quite discretionary, but you have more latitude with that. So any example that gives them that, that's what we want to provide. And again, I'll be sitting down with members of the team based on the feedback I get today about what you commissioners prefer, more of a dot exercise example or more of a household budget exercise. So I've talked a lot, but I'll go down to the bottom here and say, does the board have any question about either of the exercise portion of the program? And what I'm hoping to elicit from today's commentary is just where you all feel more comfortable landing, and then we'll focus our efforts on that and having an example for you at the next working session.
If I may start, just riffing off of something that was commented on, I think, by Commissioner Rogers about the zero sum total nature from year over year. That is kind of the situation. So is there some way that we can kind of work that aspect of this budget input into that as well? I was thinking, in my mind, I had sort of a scale picture. If you take something off of one side of the scale, you've got to put it on the other side or something like that. So we're going to have to ask the public for some choices. If we want to do X, then maybe we need to trim back at Y, and how would we, some thoughts about that?
Well, and to your question, Commissioner Scouten, I think both of these exercises are based on the fact that, or based on the idea that it has to be a balanced budget. We can't deficit spend. And so, I think the dot exercise is a more thematic exercise. It's a higher level conversation about where to drop 1 million or take 1 million away. So it really gets directly to your point. The budget exercise, I think, is more of a practice in folks that want to advocate for an area And what does that mean when it's not a $1,500 budget, but a $320 budget? And I think that really sort of, hopefully the goal of that is to sort of bring home, I think that example, was it Jack that used this yesterday, is the programs are your kids. Oh, that was Tanya. That was CAO Angie. You know, and then do you want to pay for soccer practice or for theater classes? And so I think that gets a little more down to hopefully relating to their own experience of having to make hard decisions about where the very limited dollars go. If we had more time, it would be great to do both of these exercises. I think given that we're already looking at expanding it to provide more time for CIFO, Liang, we really just were, as much as we hate to put this back on you, ask for direction on sort of the thematic larger conversation or this sort of budget, bring it home to your pocketbook.
Chair Harrington, if I can add my thoughts. Given our current budget financial context, I personally favor the household budget exercise just because it binds us to definitive numbers. And I think that's what we're talking about here in choices and trade-offs, and the reality that every household has to deal with that. So it takes a really large budget and takes it down into more of a personal exercise that individuals are dealing with on a day-to-day basis.
Can I ask a question related to that? I appreciate your experience and opinion on that. I am horrible at imagining how, this is self-described here, self-critique. I feel like I'm not equipped to, I'm having trouble imagining how the exercise will work in a virtual forum. So I really am putting my trust in the team to figure it out, because you're going to be challenged to me, I think it's a big challenge to figure out how to do that. You know, having Plan A be the household budget is great, but please know that if the logistics get too hard to do in a virtual forum, go with Plan B. And you don't have to come back and seek my input on that. Really what I've heard is we want to be able to give them a good foundation of information. I have something to add to that, but I'll hold it till a little later. But we want to have an engaging exercise. And I really feel good about you guys figuring that out.
I'd also like to comment that I think last year the one dot exercise worked well. We're doing this, and the likelihood of having a similar audience is pretty high. I think it makes sense to change the exercise as well. So from a very simplistic viewpoint, I think it's appropriate to do that. So, and I think that the household budget does get to the point that we're trying to make, and given who we project our audience to be, it helps us with the narrative at the same time.
My comment is I never have liked the dot exercise. I think it's awkward at best, and people are trying to see, well, is it socially polite when you're when you're together? I understand the logistics is not, but do I put it on that line, who's watching, and what does that mean, and do I waste it, and do I talk to my neighbor, and so it's just confusing. And household budgets, I think that could be arranged. I think you can do that. I don't know whether you're going to have the little flashcards, and hopefully it's polite flashcards that people put up, but I think it'll work.
If I could add a couple of comments. I really appreciated, Mr. Mundy, your commenting earlier about being mindful of the moment that we're at in when these will occur in November of 2020 versus November of 2019. And I know you'll do that well and professionally for us. Thank you. I've really come to another idea, and I know ideas are dangerous. You might think about having a viewer's guide. As I was sitting here listening to all of this, I was thinking about how, as a member of our community, how they'll be seeing this information coming at them. And when you'll switch and, they won't have something to look back to. You might think about having a viewer's guide. We did this a bunch at Metro with a bunch of these engagement exercises, and your viewer's guide is simply taking your slides and maybe using that. You could just provide that ahead of time and people can download it or whatever, however they get it. On each of those slides, though, for the viewer's guide, you could reference what pages in the adopted budget so that they have some further information if they choose to, or in the chart tool, which chart tools to look at. So whether it's in advance, they can use the viewer's guide during to note questions they may have, or afterwards. You just never know. So that may be something as well. So those are just, I'm very excited about this. I do think we need to extend the evening out to make sure that you're not rushed in providing that foundational overview, and that the team knows or has the opportunity to plan an exercise that is fun, engaging, and meaningful, and not just squished because we felt we had to squish it. Who likes a rushed birthday party, right? Thank you for all your creativity and openness to practicing the art of the possible and doing something new and different.
Thank you, Chair Harrington.
Thank you. I think the viewer's guide is a terrific idea. I'll say next slide, and then offer, Marcus, I don't know if you have, before I turn it over to the board for questions, if there's anything else you wanted to add.
No, that was it. And I think I have some actual direction now for our group. We'll have a plan A and a plan B, but our plan A will be headed towards the household budget exercise, but we will still have a plan B. And then when that's demonstrated in front of the board, they can say, no, that's horrible. And we'll go to plan B. But either way, that's the direction. I appreciate the feedback, commissioners.
And I do want to say, I know Marcus had said that we'll have this at the next work session. I think what he meant to say was when we have the tech run through, we'll let you know. You're welcome to join and give, final feedback or help us sort of tighten things up. So I didn't want you thinking that next week we'll be back with this because, no.
Yeah.
No, that's the presentation and we're here for questions.
I just want to reinforce that we've empowered you folks, the team, to go put together an engaging exercise, right? The trend is the household one, given all the descriptions, seems like a really great way to go, but we have totally empowered you to figure out what to do and how to do it. And we look forward to, if we're available, to participate in that tech walkthrough so that we're more familiar with it, but otherwise, go full steam ahead. Good job. Any last questions or comments?
First of all, I'd like to say, Mr. Mundy, it's wonderful to see you again, and I'm really pleased that you're part of this process. So thank you for your engagement. And number two, I would like to look again at the schedule. And, sure. And the reason I'm mentioning that is that, maybe I'm out of line here, but it seems like we've offered quite a few dates. Do we need to offer as many as are on there?
So I picked 6 dates knowing there were 5 of you and hoping that one of them would get bumped out. It sounds like the second Saturday was the one that was getting bumped.
Okay.
So we do have the Wednesday, the 18th and the 19th. And again, I want to say, if we want to push that out an additional week, I know we go into Thanksgiving, but if early December is a better fit for your schedules, if you feel like it's too many to do in a single week, we're still open to fitting what makes sense for your schedules.
I just think 6 sessions is a lot, and
yeah, no, only 5. Yeah. It was just the extra dates.
Okay, and the other thing is, we want to have a reasonable number of people that we are working with, and I don't know if there's an RSVP process or anything that we should consider. I can tell you from my perspective, it's not going to break my heart if I don't have a time to, quote, own the session. And I would rather have it be well orchestrated from the standpoint that we have, the right number of people in the room versus trying to have 5 sessions. So, yeah, that's my only point here. I think that the robust nature of conversation when there's multiple people is more effective.
What that's telling me is maybe we go down to 4.
And like I said, I just want you to know that I'm not, I don't have to speak.
Thank you. And, again, in an effort to model this off of what we did last year, I'll remind you that on average, we had 15 to 25 folks attend. This is public budgeting. And while we are in a different moment in time, it's still public budgeting. So I expect there to be some folks that we saw last year and maybe some new folks showing up. I think doing 4 of them and maybe extending the time so they're 2 hours may be a way to sort of hit that happy medium, as well as lightening up the load on your schedules if you're planning to attend them all. So why don't I work with your scheduler and your scheduler, who's me, Chair, and see if we can put together the dates and finalize that on your calendars.
The goal is to make sure that these are productive.
Absolutely.
And that people have the right information that they need and we get the right information back. So that's my rationale here.
Yep. And selfishly, I'm concerned about that week of the 16th and the fact that we have so much going on that week. That's the AOC conference. We have board stuff going on and this program. So that's.
So why don't I take a look at the first week of December? So we may do some shifting. And again, I know the members of the public, I have gotten emails with folks that are asking about this, so I know folks are paying attention. But once we get it locked in, we'll get that pushed out properly and make sure that these are successful.
But if we do take it down to just a 4th, so that we're not meeting Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday night.
Okay, we'll take a look.
It could be doable.
Great, thank you for that feedback.
And as far as the 21st, that's fine with me, but if you want to push that one out a little further, that also might give the new commissioner opportunity to have some downtime before they kind of
jump in.
Sort of, jump into this.
Okay, thank you for all that.
Good job, it's going to be fun.
Well, a little kindness isn't a thing these days. I know you are.
So at this point, we have a lunch break, and then we come back. Do you want to still come back at 1 o'clock or at 1:06? 1 o'clock. Okay, we'll be back at 1 o'clock and pick up with our last topic of the day.
And Chair, I'm going to need to leave right at 2.
Okay.
So I just want you to know.
And Commissioner Rogers will be attending via Zoom. Great.
Okay.
All righty, we'll see you back here or in the meeting at 1. Thank you.
Okay.